Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Bellevue Regular City Council meeting for April 11th, 2022. Tonight we have Deputy City Clerk Karen Roberts filling in for Charmaine, and Councilmember Robertson is not able to join us for this meeting and was seeking an excused absence. Is there a motion for that?
So moved. I'd like to move that Councilwoman Robertson will be excused for this meeting.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. City Clerk or Deputy City Clerk, could you please do the roll call?
Mayor Robinson?
Here.
Deputy Mayor Neuenhouse?
Here.
Councilmember Barksdale?
Here.
Councilmember Lee?
Here.
Councilmember Robertson? Councilmember Stokes?
Here.
Councilmember Zahn?
Here.
Thank you. Councilmember Stokes, could you please lead us in this flag salute?
Yes, I pledge allegiance to the flag
The flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. So actually, I don't ever remember receiving final word on whether or not we have 3 proclamations or 2 proclamations, Deputy Mayor.
There are 3, Mayor.
All right, perfect. Why don't we start with the first one, which I believe you are reading. Would you please go ahead?
It would be my honor to do so, Mayor. Thank you. This is a proclamation in regards to National Public Safety Telecommuters Week. So whereas when an emergency occurs, the prompt response of emergency responders, including police officers, firefighters, and paramedics, is critical to the protection of life and preservation of property. And whereas the effectiveness and safety of our first responders is dependent upon the quality and accuracy of information obtained from citizens who telephone the NORCOM Emergency Communication Center. And whereas in 2021, NORCOM answered 283,834 emergency and non-emergency calls, averaging 777 calls a day, covering a service area of 660 square miles. And whereas public safety telecommunicators are the first and most critical contact our citizens have with emergency services, and also serve as a vital link for our police officers and firefighters by monitoring activities through radio, collecting key information, and ensuring the safety of emergency responders. And whereas public safety telecommunicators of NORCOM are a vital part of our communities, contributing substantially to the apprehension of criminals, suppression of fires, treatment of patients, overall response to emergencies, and compassion for community members and what may be their most desperate moments. And whereas each dispatcher must exhibit empathy, understanding, and professionalism during the performance of that job under difficult circumstances that are stressful and traumatic. Now, therefore, I, on behalf of Lynn Robinson, Mayor of the City of Bellevue, Washington, and on behalf of its City Council, do hereby proclaim the week of April 10th through the 16th, 2022 as National Public Safety Telecommunicators Week in Bellevue, and encourage all residents to join us in recognizing and expressing appreciation for our emergency telecommunicators for their honorable profession and public service to us all, and to learn more about what we can do to support the effectiveness of our emergency systems at norcom.org.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. The next one I am going to read, and it is an Autism Acceptance Month proclamation, which is great timing because we have our All In for Autism Fun Run on April 24th down by the downtown park. So I hope everybody will join us down there. I'm sure you can we'll find out more information on the city calendar. Whereas autism spectrum disorders, or ASDs, contribute to the neurodiversity of the world, creating differences in the way we interact. ASDs are complex brain development differences that can often be characterized by unique patterns of behavior and varying levels of social interaction and communication. And whereas according to studies by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, About 1 in 44 children in the US is diagnosed with autism spectrum disorders, which occur in all racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic groups. And whereas ASDs have no single known cause, though early intervention can provide more supports for the growth, learning, and quality of life for those with autism. And whereas organizations supporting the growth and the development of people with autism may be underfunded and rely on grants and financial support from the community, managing autism through childhood costs about $60,000 per year, and the annual economic cost of autism in the US is expected to reach $461 billion by 2025. And whereas the City of Bellevue supports the efforts of organizations that fund and promote awareness of autism spectrum disorders to improve the lives of people with autism and their loved ones, provide community information and resources, promote acceptance and foster inclusive practices welcoming to those with ASDs. And whereas the City of Bellevue recognizes how people with autism enrich our communities with unique perspectives and lived experience through the Diversity Advantage Initiative, Bellevue is committed to inclusion, equal access, and opportunity, including supported employment programs and human services funding to embrace the contribution of residents with ASDs in our schools, government, workforce, and community. Now, therefore, I, Lynn Robinson, Mayor of the City of Bellevue, Washington, and on behalf of its City Council, do hereby proclaim April 2022 as Autism Acceptance Month in Bellevue and encourage Bellevue community members to find out more about autism spectrum disorders, explore the resources available, and join the city in fostering inclusion, equity, and access for ASD individuals and families, and join us on that fun run. Signed, me. Okay. And then our last one is the Pasado Day Proclamation. Councilmember Stokes, could you please read that for us?
Yes, Mayor. Whereas Pasado, the donkey who lived at Kelsey Creek Farm, touched the hearts of countless Bellevue residents with his sweet personality and joyful presence, which I have observed. And whereas Pasado was killed 30 years ago and his death stunned the local community, but it ignited a force and a voice for the animals. And whereas Pasado's Safe Haven was founded in Pasado's honor to end animal cruelty and create a more compassionate world. And whereas Pasado's law was passed, which made first-degree animal cruelty a felony in Washington, and whereas Pasado's Safe Haven has, for 25 years, rescued thousands of animals in our community from abuse and neglect, provided a safe haven, medical care, and found new homes for rescued animals, fought to improve legal protections for animals, and inspire new thinking about which animals deserve our protection, helped improve access to basic pet services for income-qualified families in our community. Now, therefore, I, John Stokes, on behalf of Lynn Robinson, Mayor of the City of Bellevue, Washington, and on behalf of its council members, do hereby proclaim April 15th, 2022 as Pasado Day.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor, could you make a motion to approve the agenda, please?
Certainly, Mayor, I move to approve the agenda.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? Okay. Mr. Miyake, we have some exciting things on our agenda tonight, and I'll let you introduce the first one.
Thank you, Mayor Robinson and council members. Good evening. Under tonight's regional issues agenda, which is our next topic for the meeting tonight, we have two topics. The first topic is a summary of the 2022 state legislative session. We have a number of legislators as well as the BDA and Chamber joining us. Thank you very much for being here this evening. The second is an overview of the city's proposed federal legislative agenda. Joining us this evening is Lacey Jane Wolf, our Assistant Director of Intergovernmental Affairs, as well as I mentioned a number of guests, which I will allow Lacey Jane to introduce this evening. So Lacey Jane, take it away.
Good evening. It's my pleasure to be here today for a discussion of the 2022 legislative session. We're joined by a number of people who helped advance Bellevue's priorities this year. So I'd like to introduce them first of all. We're joined from the 48th Legislative District by Senator Patty Kuderer, Representative Vandana Slatter, and Representative Amy Wallen. And from the 41st, we're joined by Senator Lisa Wellman and Representative Tana Sen. And Representative Neelan Tai was unable to be here with us tonight, but of course we appreciate her efforts on Bellevue's behalf as well. I know you all are looking forward, Council, to joining me in thanking our legislators, but what we'd like to do first is hear from Brianna Murray, Bellevue's contract lobbyist and Vice President at Gordon Thomas Honeywell Governmental Affairs. She was our champion this year. I know she spoke with our legislators practically daily, if not multiple times a day, and she knows Bellevue and our priorities inside and out. So I can't think of a better person to give us a summary and just the highlights of the, I believe, 303 bills that passed the legislature this session. And last but not least, joining Brianna is going to be two partners who were instrumental in advancing Bellevue's priorities, especially our transportation priorities, and that is Patrick Bannon from the BDA and Joe Fain from the Chamber, who worked with us to develop our joint transportation priorities. So we have a great program for you tonight. I'm going to hand it off now to Brianna Murray.
Thank you, Lacey Jane. Good evening, Mayor, Council, and hello again to our 41st and 48th District legislators. You all are tired of hearing from me, but you get to hear from me just a little bit more this evening. I'm going to share my screen to bring up a PowerPoint presentation, and I'm going to just dive right into it in the interest of time. So this evening, I'm hoping to provide you all with an overview of the 2022 legislative session and highlight some of the legislative priorities that you all outlined in your legislative agenda. And then we'll conclude with a thank you to the folks who really made it happen, which was our legislators. Starting first with an overview of the 2022 session. The session was the second year of the two-year legislative biennium, and as such, it was a short 60-day session. Like the 2021 session, it was conducted almost entirely virtually, and Democrats held the majority in both the House of Representatives and the State Senate. All bills that were introduced in the first year of the biennium carried over to the second year. Additionally, 1,156 new bills were introduced. Of all of the bills that were under consideration, 309 passed the legislature, and of those, the governor vetoed 6, resulting in 303 new bills. In addition to the many policy bills that the legislature considered, they also adopted the supplemental operating budget, which totaled to be $63 billion, and a $1.5 billion supplemental capital budget. They also adopted the Move Ahead Washington transportation package, which was a $17 billion transportation package, making investments over the next 16 years that relied on a $2 billion transfer from the operating budget, federal funding, Climate Commitment Act funding, funding from an increase in fees, but it did not include a gas tax increase. So that is a very high level overview of the 2022 session. With that in mind, I'll transition into some of the specific priorities that you all outlined, starting first with transportation. We have been working together with the Bellevue Chamber and the Bellevue Downtown Association for several years now to encourage the legislature to adopt a transportation revenue package and to make investments in the Bellevue area to assist Bellevue in accommodating the immense amount of growth that is coming our way. The Move Ahead Washington package included several of the items that we requested, including $450 million to close the revenue shortfall on the 405-167 corridor. Addressing this shortfall will allow projects along the corridor to be completed on time and in advance of the deployment of Sound Transit's bus rapid transit on the corridor. Additionally, $18 million was allocated to East Rail through Bellevue, and $6.9 million was allocated to the Mountains to Sound Greenway project and the portion specifically referred to as the Bellevue Gap. This is an immense amount of investment in the Bellevue area within the Move Ahead Washington package, and significantly more investment than most other areas of the state received. With that being said, there are a few projects that were not allocated funding that we'll need to continue to work on. And that was funding the 124th 520 interchange, downtown Bellevue access off of 405, and identifying planning funding to improve the 405 interchanges at 520 and I-90. Additionally, the city partnered with the Association of Washington Cities in requesting an increase in preservation and maintenance funding for local city and county-owned systems. The final Move Ahead Washington package included $80 million for the Transportation Improvement Board and $80 million for the County Road Administration Board over 16 years. While that is a nice allocation, the need, especially statewide, is much greater than that. So that will also be an item we'll continue to work on. All in all, the adoption of a transportation package in a short 60-day session with investments in Bellevue is a huge success. And I want to turn it over to Joe and Patrick to offer their comments on this joint endeavor we've done together. Starting first with Joe.
Great, thank you, Brianna, and I want to thank everyone for their incredible work on this, and thank the City Council and City staff for giving us a quick moment to speak here this evening. I'm Joe Fain. I'm the President and CEO of the Bellevue Chamber, and for several years now, the Chamber and the City have coordinated on a joint transportation agenda and bringing these priorities to our local legislators, and that came to a great event this last summer, where we were joined by many of the legislators that are here today, as well as some others, as well as a number of our city leaders, including the mayor and senior staff, to tour so many of these important transportation sites that did end up getting funding in this year's transportation package. In particular, obviously the 405 funding is critical, but often overlooked in some of these packages can be some of those smaller projects, like what we were able to see come together in East Rail. And with that investment from the state, coupled with some of the private investment that's come in from several players, including Amazon, we're just going to see an absolute renaissance on the east side of 405. And this is such an important part of building that next version of the city of Bellevue that is accessible by all modes of transportation. This partnership that we've had with the city has been really enabled by two great people, Brianna Murray, who of course we're hearing from tonight, our city lobbyist, as well as Lizette Cadena, our chamber lobbyist down in Olympia. And they've worked very closely together, and I know have been on your call sheets over and over and over again over the last several years to help bring attention to these projects. We hope to continue this partnership. We know that the work is not yet done, as Brianna pointed out, with some of those projects, and also with the next item on the agenda tonight, with the federal agenda that the Chamber is also in support of, and we'll be working to help bring together in our trip to DC back in this winter. I guess I'll just close by saying, after the passage of the 2015 package, I myself would make the rounds to the city councils, and there were some great thank you events, and they always had cake. So if you have any dessert hanging out at your house, you're free to partake, and hopefully we'll be together soon so that we can celebrate this great achievement together. Again, to all of our legislators, thank you so much for your hard work this last session, and for your willingness to do the hard work to make this big investment in our city. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Patrick, would you like to make a few comments?
Yeah, good evening, everyone. Joe said it extremely well. The level of investment, the type of investments that the legislature's made are diversified, which is what you want in any smart portfolio. This is going to serve the growth that we see near term, and it's going to benefit future generations as they look to make regional connections and improve their quality of life in our region. On behalf of the Bellevue Downtown Association, our membership, everyone who works together to make our community thrive, I want to thank our legislative delegation in the city of Bellevue for this extremely great outcome, and the courage and collaboration just to stick with it. The perseverance showed through this session and a short session, and greatly appreciate the teamwork that went into it. We often call downtown Bellevue a work in progress, and the results of this session clearly show a lot of progress going into our work. So I greatly appreciate it and wish you all well and look forward to working with you in the near future.
Great. Thank you both. And with that as an overview on transportation, I'm going to move us along to another very important topic, which is housing. You all as a council prioritized housing and asked the legislature to make investments in housing and addressing homelessness, and the legislature responded. At a very Bellevue specific level, we had requested that funding that was allocated in 2021 to the Eastgate shelter be transferred to the Eligibility apartments so that it could be utilized immediately. And fortunately, the legislature granted that transfer. And so those funds have been transferred over to a new project. Beyond that, and at a more global and regional level, the legislature made investments through the supplemental operating and supplemental capital budget that were unprecedented. $114 million was allocated to the Housing Trust Fund, $240 million for rapid acquisition housing grants, and $100 million for a new program called Apple Health and Homes, which provides supportive housing to those that are receiving state medical assistance under Washington's Medicaid program. That new program will be instrumental in helping move people out of homelessness. Additionally, the legislature allocated $45 million to transition individuals that are living in encampments within state right-of-ways to permanent supportive housing, and provided a state real estate excise tax exemption for properties that are purchased for the purposes of affordable housing. All of these investments are in addition to the investments that were made during the 2021 session, making the biennial budget the largest investment in housing that we have seen in state history. Moving on to another hot topic this session, which was around land use. The legislature considered 3 different proposals that did not inevitably pass into law, but were discussed a great deal over the 60-day session. The first one would have mandated that cities take certain actions to allow for middle housing types. The second would have mandated cities adopt regulations around accessory dwelling units. And the third one would have integrated a climate change element into the Growth Management Act. As I mentioned, these bills did not inevitably pass into law. However, these are very hot topics that I anticipate will be discussed in future legislative sessions, and they received a great deal of discussion throughout the 60-day session. One policy that did pass into law was House Bill 1241, which made a change to the GMA comprehensive plan deadlines to make them every 10 years rather than every 8 years. The next deadline for Bellevue's comprehensive plan update was also pushed back from June of 2024 to December of 2024. And the legislature allocated significant funding for planning grants that will be administered by the Department of Commerce to not only facilitate jurisdictions in completing existing requirements under comprehensive plan deadlines, but also undertaking some new work to allow for middle housing types and increased density. Moving on to community or public safety, you all will recall that in 2021, the legislature adopted a suite of bills making reforms to policing. In 2022, the legislature revisited some of those policies and made modifications. The first bill they approved was 1735, which restored the ability of an officer to use force to bring people into custody for civil or forensic commitments and as directed through court orders. The second bill is House Bill 2037, which allows force to be used to prevent a person to hold a person who is intentionally fleeing an officer. And the third bill is House Bill 1719, which clarifies that shotguns can be used to shoot beanbags, rubber bullets, and other less lethal alternatives. In addition to these 3 bills that passed, the legislature had a robust discussion about whether or not to make changes on when officers can engage in vehicular pursuits. While it was discussed right up until the final days of session, that bill inevitably did not pass. In addition to those policy changes, the legislature did increase the funding for the Basic Law Enforcement Academy. This is the academy that all new officers must go through prior to serving on our streets. The legislature added an additional 13 classes so that officers can be trained in a timely manner. Moving on to climate and environment. In the 2021 session, the legislature took bold action in adopting a low carbon fuel standard and a climate commitment act. In the subsequent short session that just concluded, the legislature built on that work with two primary policy bills, one which would expanded clean building performance standards to reduce greenhouse gases in buildings over 50,000 square feet, and another that established a goal to reduce food and yard waste in landfills by 75% by 2030, with new requirements going into effect 5 years from now. Through the budgets, the legislature allocated $300 million to electric vehicle investments for grants and incentive programs, and $100 million to increase solar deployment. And finally, the legislature recognized that our state is in many ways still recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic and made some targeted investments into economic development and small business support. $200 million was allocated for economic development grants. $34.5 million was allocated to spur small business recovery, startup, and growth. $25 million was allocated to businesses and nonprofits in the arts, heritage, cultural, and science sectors. Those grant programs will be administered through the Department of Commerce and will hopefully help assist small businesses throughout Washington state. Additionally, the legislature approved Senate Bill 5980, which provides B&O tax relief for small businesses. Small businesses with a gross annual revenue of under $125,000 will now be exempt from B&O tax. The city of Bellevue on the whole accomplished most, if not all, of its legislative priorities this last legislative session. We've been pushing for years for a transportation revenue package, and one passed. Not only did it pass, but it made significant investments in Bellevue and addressed a huge revenue shortfall on the 405 corridor. We made a request for housing in the first year of the biennium, and our legislators went to bat to get us $2 million for that housing project, which is much more than most other communities receive. And then they worked with us within this last year to transfer it to a different project so that we can use it in a timely and effective manner. So those dollars are put to work. I cannot say enough good things about the legislators that have joined us here this evening. They've had an open door for me as your advocate. And really, it hasn't been an open door, but an open phone line and an open text exchange. And I just want to thank each of them for their hard work over the last 60 days. It's an incredibly thankless job. And lately it's just been hours and hours in front of a computer without a lot of the interpersonal interactions. So I just want to take a moment to express my personal thanks and let you all know what great advocates you have, the legislators that have joined us this evening. And with that, I will, Mayor, turn it over to you for comments, and happy to attempt to answer any questions.
Thank you so much. And I just want to thank Brianna and Lacey Jane for the tremendously good work you did this session. You gave us robust communications with all our representatives, and we got a lot accomplished, and we could not have done that without your help. So thank you so much. I know that everybody has a lot to say tonight, so I'm going to ask that you limit it to 3 minutes. I'll give everybody a chance to comment or ask questions, but if you have more questions than time allows, please feel free to email Lacey Jane all your questions, and she'll bring your questions and answers back next week to all of us so we can see them, okay? So if you'd like to, council members, do you want to raise your hands, and if you have comments or questions? I have a comment or question. I'll start, and then we'll go with council members on. And use your hands up thing. It makes it easier for me to manage. So my question, well, first of all, a huge thank you. We started talking about the transportation package a year ago. And as we were dealing with the challenges of whether or not, we were going to get the funding for all the work that we felt needed to be done, our population started growing. We started developing all this new housing and office, and new jobs have already started coming into our city. So this couldn't be a better time to get the funding needed to manage our transportation challenges. My two questions are with Senate Bill 5755 and House Bill 1799. Both of those, I'm wondering how they can be used in Bellevue, and if our city needs to adopt any specific policy to utilize those. And I'll let our representatives raise their hand if anybody wants to answer that question. And if you don't, it's okay. Brianna will answer it for us next week. Okay, Senator Cooter.
Welcome. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Robinson, and good evening, everyone. It's always a pleasure to be before you. Thank you so much for your leadership and your work. I have to say, I love being a Bellevue resident. It's a beautiful city to live in. So 5755, what you will have to adopt a program. It's a sales and use incentive program to incentivize private developers to build on vacant lands. So envision a parking lot that isn't being used, that sort of thing. I don't know that it's actually going to affect Bellevue. It was really kind of a small pilot project that was based in the Tacoma area. But if that data that we get back after we monitor this turns out to be what we think it's going to be, I fully expect that to be a statewide program. And I hope that's helpful.
Okay.
Senator Cooter, if I may just chime in on the eligibility, there were 5 communities that were eligible for that, and Bellevue is one of the 5.
Oh,
so
great.
We are one of the pilot programs.
That's good. Well, then we are in that, and that you will have to create that sales and use tax incentive program.
Okay, great. Okay, I don't see any other volunteers to speak to the other ones. So.
Mayor Robinson, may I just add one other thing?
Yeah, of course.
This actually is on the use of force bill, and Brianna does a great job. But the bill that she's referring to just is not about someone intentionally fleeing a law enforcement officer. It's about someone actively fleeing, and the officer has to give notice. I did vote against that bill because the word intentionally was not in there. I'm a former prosecutor. And it was, and to be honest, tonight when you did the proclamation on people who are on the autistic spectrum, they were front and center in my mind because they don't always understand what's being asked of them. And when you're talking about use of force, that can be up to and including deadly force. I also was thinking about people with physical limitations, hard of hearing in our deaf community. We had an instance in Seattle where a gentleman who was partially deaf was shot. He was not committing any crime. The officer thought he understood, but clearly he didn't even hear. And he lost his life for it. And the city of Seattle paid nearly $2 million in a wrongful death lawsuit for that. I was also thinking about people who have English as a second language, or maybe not at all, may not understand the notice. And we had included the word intentionally, but it was taken out. And so that was a problem for me. And I feel very strongly that law enforcement, we need to make sure they have the tools and the resources that they need to do the very difficult job that they do. But we also need law enforcement that works for everybody. And so with that clarification, I just wanted to let everyone know that that bill will probably be monitored very closely. And hopefully we won't have an instance where there is an autistic child who does unfortunately end up in that situation. But that they were front and center in my mind when I did vote against that bill. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to say that.
Thank you, Senator Cooter. Representative Slatter, I see your hand is up.
Thank you. Yes, it was a I'm just responding to your question on 1799, or trying to respond. I think we might have to get back to you, Mayor Robinson, because it was not an uncomplex bill, but there are some citing requirements and ordinance requirements, but also there's some permissibility there. So I don't have the details for you on that. But I also just wanted to deeply thank you all for inviting us here today. And I don't know, do you want us to go through a minute or two with the individually to speak to some of our thoughts, or would you prefer we just respond now?
I think actually I'll let the council members ask questions and hopefully give everybody a chance to speak to the questions, if that's all right with you.
That's perfect. Thank you. But I just did want to echo my thanks to Brianna and her team, and also just really thank everyone for the powerful alignment of priorities that Bellevue brings to the legislature every year. I can't tell you how incredibly important that is and how strategic that is in being able to deliver on really big needs. So thank you. And Mayor Robinson, you have, I think, testified, I don't know, countless times now in the last session. I think I saw you many times in front of the committee. So I just really want to personally thank you and other council members for your presence. It makes a big difference. And you may not think so with a couple of minutes to speak, but it really does. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you for that. Councilmember Zahn, I'll let you speak next, and then Councilmember Stokes, and then Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. You know, what I thought about is this is successful partnerships in action is what we saw this legislative session. And I really appreciate all the work you've done. You know, the transportation and getting that funding so we can actually have our BRT and East Rail and Mountain to Sound connection is huge. But I think even more than that, the fact that there's the climate and environment piece. I look forward to us pursuing the EV investment grants as well as the solar deployment. And then I was also thinking about the B&O tax relief for small business as well as the grant for economic vitality that will go a long ways for our small mom and pop shops, as well as workforce development on healthcare. It looks like we're creating more of an incentive and a pipeline to grow that part of the economy and getting more people. So I thank you for that. The questions I had, I think it's slightly different than the mayor. The affordable housing sales tax incentive 5755, is that the same one that the mayor talked about? Okay, so I'm excited about that one. The funding for homelessness, I wondered if the safe parking programs might be one that would fit that lens as well, because we are considering a safe parking program in the city. So I was curious about that. And then lastly, on the Move Ahead Washington, I read something in there about safety speed cameras and being able to expand some of that use. So those were the couple of questions that I had as I read through so much content in here, but those were in particular some areas I was interested in, is the safe parking program and then the safe speeding cameras.
Is there somebody who would like to speak to those two questions? If you put your hand up, I could see you, or we can have our staff get back to us. Senator Cooter, I see your hand is up.
Yes, the safe parking program would be eligible for monies.
Excellent.
That's great.
Brianna, did you want to add to that?
Sure. I was just going to speak to the broader authority for speed cameras that's been authorized. So within the Move Ahead Washington package, all cities are authorized to utilize speed cameras outside of school zones. Right now, current law, you're limited to only school zones. There is specific criteria outlined in the language about where outside of school zones speed cameras can be used. And we can certainly send that along to you, but it is much broader authority than existed previously.
Okay.
Great, thank you. We're starting finding a lot more people driving much faster these days. Thank you.
I see Councilmember Stokes coming and going, and I don't see him. Okay, there he is. Councilmember Stokes, are you ready to comment or ask a question?
Yeah, apparently I've gotten taken offline a couple of times. I don't know what's going on. We haven't perfected this quite yet. Yeah, I think it's really exciting to have this presentation, and you know, there are a lot of questions we could ask, but it's just a fantastic work done this year. And I think a number of us have been on council long enough and all been involved in this to see that this was a particularly well-coordinated, launched effort to really do some great things. And, the results are fine. I mean, we never get everything we want, but most of the times we at least get what we need and maybe more. And all I want to say is I think this has been, in my experience here and in other places and doing legislative work and all, we have a team, both in the legislature and then our representatives working with us, our staffing, and the two groups with the Patrick and Joe, and all working together, and we got great results. And we, I think, have set a really good path on the next year going forward on this, because this is just a time that is so much growth going on, and in this area in Bellevue particularly, that we're just lucky to have the team I think we have going forward. So I just want to give you great thanks for this and looking forward to working next year. And we have a lot more to cover, but if we can just keep this going and even make it better, we're going to accomplish really, really great things. So just appreciate it, and looking forward to working with you going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Stokes. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. And I just want to recognize Senator Wellman, I believe, has just joined us as well. So I just wanted to recognize her. Actually, funny story, when we ran into each other at the AGC, we ended up being at the same table. I said, we delivered for Bellevue, didn't we? I said, absolutely. Thank you so much, Senator Wellman.
I have been here. I just had to change computers.
Oh, okay.
I've been here for the whole meeting. So.
Okay, great. Well, I made the comparison to our legislative delegation a couple of years ago to the U.S. Women's National Team, and I think that's still appropriate because they just continue to deliver for us on a consistent basis, and just thrilled with the results, especially on the two biggest issues of transportation and affordable housing, which is so critical. And yes, we didn't get everything that we would have liked, especially as Brianna had mentioned about the 405 interchanges with 520 and I-90, and then the access into downtown Bellevue. But I'm sure that'll be something that she'll be calling all of you about consistently. But the affordable housing piece too is just so important, and the investments there are just fantastic. And we are so lucky as a city to have such a great, well-coordinated, as Councilmember Stokes mentioned, and a lot of that effort and that hard work was from Brianna and Lacey James. So thank the both of you as well for doing such a tremendous job in such a short session. So much was accomplished. So thank you again to all of you. And I had one question. And feel free for anyone to answer it, but something that I'm concerned, especially in Bellevue, but it's a regional issue. And it's concerning marijuana dispensaries. As you all are aware, there's an increasingly targeted by criminals, and they're targeting these dispensaries because it's usually an old cash business. And also the second factor is that the product itself is pretty much untraceable and easily sold once it's stolen. And in the city of Bellevue, we only have 5 dispensaries, but in 2009, there was 1 robbery. There were 3 in 2020. There were 5 in 2021, and there have been 4 already in the first quarter of 2022. And these robberies have increasingly become more violent with the use of firearms that have resulted in the deaths of employees as well as suspects. Now, I know there was, I believe, Senate Bill 5927, if I'm correct, tried to help address this issue. And my understanding is there was bipartisan support, and it got out of the Senate, but unfortunately it died in the House. And this was looking to add a year to the prison sentence of someone who was convicted of a first or second degree robbery of a cannabis shelter. And my understanding was that this was modeled after the sentence that was given to folks who rob a pharmacy. So this is an issue that's top of mind for me. And I was just curious if anyone on our legislative delegation here will seek to either address or support such legislation next session.
Okay, Representative San, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, I'm happy to comment. And I think it's very sad of those who've lost their lives just for going to work. So I appreciate and share your concern there. And definitely one of the major issues is really a federal issue about allowing marijuana businesses to use credit cards and banking. And right now, because it is an all cash business, it really does have a target on it. And I think that is very unfortunate. One good note is we did expand the dollars that will be going out to cities from marijuana revenue over the coming years. And so that was definitely a plus and a highlight, which has been, we've been steadily increasing that over a number of years since that has become legal in order to help with law enforcement costs and other things. In terms of increasing penalties, we really have had a very conscious effort not to add new crimes and increase penalties in the legislature right now, given our awareness of the disproportionate impacts and implementation of a lot of laws on communities of color and kind of the historic racism that we have seen in the criminal justice system. So we have been making a constant effort to not add new crimes or expand crimes at this point until we get that more under control for sure. So I think, unfortunately, that there's not always a deterrent in our by just increasing penalties. So I hope we can get more housing, more supports, and reduce criminal activity in that regard. I would also just note, since you mentioned with guns, that we did make a lot of progress on the front of around guns in the legislature this year. We banned ghost guns, which President Biden did today as well, made them illegal for the whole country, but we did that in Washington State, and banned the sale and distribution of high capacity magazines, which I think was really a top priority. And then very specifically for you all, we did ban open carry of weapons at city council meetings and county council meetings, school board meetings, and election sites, really to make sure that no one is intimidated from, when we go back in person, to accessing their government with fear of intimidation. So I'm very excited by those three pieces of legislation as well.
Thank you very much. Council Representative Slatter, I see your hand is up as well.
I just thought I'd make a quick brief comment because I think Representative Sen covered it really well with respect to the banking and the different aspects of financing for these stores. But it's interesting when you mentioned pharmacies, Councilmember Neuenhuis. I was on the board of pharmacy at one time between 2007 and 2011, and we had the highest rate in Washington State of violent robberies in pharmacies in the nation. And part of that is due to the opiate crisis and other reasons. And so you can understand the complexity of problem solving in this space, although marijuana cannabis definitely comes under a slightly different umbrella of impacts. So thank you for raising the question and letting us know the statistics.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Lee, I see your hand is up.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It's amazing that we have such a united representatives from all of you working together, effectively. Obviously, it's amazing that you're all representing us, on the east side, and of course, the whole state. So we're very, very thankful. And it's important that, I want to thank you for the accessibility that we have as a city through our lobbyists, to talk to you and how you responded to us. And obviously, some of the things that we are interested, we cannot get everything we need. I'm personally interested in technology. So you mentioned about, that includes transportation and extend to other things like climate change, environment, Vision Zero, safety. I think all that can be achieved through technology. So, that's very far reaching. So you can only get to a few of those items, but I think you're making good progress, such as the, EV charging support. At Bellevue, still, we don't have a real strong EV charging program. And I don't think we have any money for that. But these are specific things that, you have, it's challenging for you. You have to spread the butter around a lot of jurisdictions. So we can only hope for so much. But the key is that, we have accessibility to you. That's great. And so one of the things we do then is through even including our federal legislative agenda, we want to be sure that we have you to support us and defend us from unfunded mandates, to give us local control. This is, the local government, local jurisdictions better than anybody else does. Our jurisdictions. So I think we hope that we depend on you to make sure that whatever happens, it protects our interests. What is right for Bellevue, what is right for our local jurisdictions within the reach of the overall program that we're talking about. And so besides since there's opportunity for you to make a couple of pitches, I'm going to include a couple more besides technology. One is cross-culture center, which is important because our region is very multicultural and we need to have people talking to each other, working together. And so it's not the division we see, it's not a polarization, but in fact, we're working to solve our common problems. So I like to, we have lots of immigrants. I think 40% of the population are immigrants. So I would like to see more. And another one, of course, is educating young people. We know education, obviously, everybody talks about is the leveler. But, we have different challenges in, educating the different people. So another one is economic development, workforce training. That actually relates to technology as well and relates to our people, our community. So we need to be sure that when transition, whatever transition we go into, whether it be technology or just because we have a different culture, environment, economy, we need to be sure that we are trained and ready, for ourselves, for the new culture. Mm-hmm. So I hope that this can be worked through, and but finally, I still think that when we started the meeting, we're very thankful that we are having a big celebration of all you there, and it's a great environment and great. I believe that we hope to continue with your support moving forward. So thank you for doing it. Thank you for helping us. Thank you for bringing local perspective to the state legislature. Thank you.
Councilmember Lee, those were a lot of very good points and questions. So I'm going to ask Senator Wellman to answer the first one, which I believe was about electric vehicles. And then your other questions we can get back to you on.
I actually felt that I was being teed up in my role as chair of education from Councilmember Lee, and I really did appreciate that. In fact, today I was at Sammamish High School I don't know that you've done a recognition of your Robototes team, but hopefully you're aware that your first Washington robotics team has won the Chairman's Award and will be going to nationals. It's so exciting. And I will point out that, we've worked very hard to make sure that we have funded education through this challenging period of time when none of the ways we handle education, none of the formulas work because of the disruption with COVID. So that has been, over the last 2 years, that's really been a major focus that we've had really almost from the time that we closed schools through now. We have really worked hard to make sure that your schools have what they need. I will tell you that I had probably about 40 young people who are talking about why is robotics not given the same recognition and support as your football team and your band, et cetera. And as you probably know, I'm working very hard to make sure computer science is available to each and every young person because it is the future. Councilmember Lee, you were talking about technology, and this is not our industrial age that perhaps we were taught in. This is a digital age, and we have knowledge workers, and that's where the future is. And we have to make sure that all of our kids have what they need, with regard to that. The other thing that Councilmember Lee mentioned was our multicultural community, which is so vital but challenging, and especially challenging at the education center. So there were some significant bills and a significant focus on language access to families and schools, and making sure that families understood what was happening in the schools. That was a really very important. Representative Orwell has been working on this for quite a while, and we did make some significant inroads there. I am excited about what's happening. I'll go back to charging stations and really focusing on that because I think that we're looking at housing for the future that is ready to accept the type of electrification that will be necessary for future automobiles. And, that being said, transportation is one of our biggest footprints on the planet in many, many ways. And so we will be looking, kind of to make sure that there is more there. I can't mention specific bills, but it's of constant concern to us. We certainly have seen many of our corporate partners, such as Amazon, converting to those vehicles. The other thing that I'm interested in, because Bellevue has been such on the forefront of autonomous vehicles, which is really going to make a significant change. One of the things that we're going to have to be looking at with autonomous vehicles is what happens to your parking fees. Because if I can send my car home, I'm not going to pay $30 a day to park it. And so as we move in that direction, that will have an impact there. Those are just some thoughts that I have. Immigration is an interesting, it's one of those, that was really one of my first major bills was about immigration. And the United States in general is having a challenge right now because our population is aging so rapidly. And over the last 6 years now, we have really lost that thrust of new immigration that we have so counted on to really energize our economy. And we're getting older, and it's going to impact us if we don't open up immigration, more effectively. So that's what I'm working on and thinking about these days.
Thank you, Senator Wellen. Representative Sen, I see your hand is up.
Thank you, Mayor Robinson. Thank you, Councilmember Lee, for the question and comments about technology. I did just want to share that one of the bills that I worked closely on that went through Representative Slatter's committee too was working with the WTIA, the Washington Technology Industry Association. We passed a bill looking at the blockchain policies that I know, Mayor, you're on the Cascadia blockchain work group or council as well, looking at how we can expand blockchain technology in our area, in our state, but also with an eye to making sure that it's an environmental, that we look at the environmental impacts and that we make sure that it's consumer oriented as well. And so, and taking into account a variety of other issues. So really excited about that and excited to hopefully be serving on that council and that work group as well. And then I would also just mention that we did also make investments in cybersecurity workforce, which is a very exciting expansion as well. Then I would also want to mention that I enjoyed greatly attending a rally at Bellevue Downtown Park for the Ukrainian refugees and for really standing strong. Saw Councilmember Neuenhuis there as well, and council members on, and it really was moving to be there. And it was, we as a state are investing $74 million in refugee resettlement dollars, both for Ukrainian refugees and for Afghani refugees and others, but really with that target in mind. And so just wanted to say how how powerful it was and what a large community we really have of Ukrainians in the Bellevue area and East Side. So that was a wonderful event that I was glad to be able to participate in as well.
Thank you. So we have yet to hear from Councilmember Barksdale, so I'll give you a chance if you have a question or comment, and then we have yet to hear from Representative Wallen either. So Councilmember Barksdale.
All right, thank you, Mayor. First, just many thanks for a productive session from our representatives and senators representing the 41st and 48th. Thank you so much for all that effort and time. I did have one question around housing and land use, as you probably know. We are in great need of housing, all types of housing. And so I was curious about it. There were a couple bills, I think, that were advancing missing middle types that Brianna had mentioned. And while they're not necessarily novel, I do think that, you know, we need all types of housing. And so I was just curious about any reaction to what happened with those bills and any thoughts about what's needed to advance missing middle housing bills in the future, because I don't think this is just a Bellevue challenge, it is a state challenge as well. So thank you.
So Representative Wallen, I see your hands up, and then Senator Cooter.
Thank you so much, Madam Mayor, and thanks, Councilmember Barksdale. I think, you know, the top issues facing our district are housing, affordability, and tax reform, and of course, gun violence, preventable gun violence, which we've spoken about. Those bills were very controversial. You know, cities, organizations of cities tend to default to the local control, right? So rather than, we have associations of cities that, excuse me, just one second. This working from home thing. Anyway, you know, what I think one thing is that the policy was painted as we're getting rid of single family zoning. That is not how we want to talk about this policy. What we want to do is talk about complete communities where there's a path for every person, where the people who live in our communities can afford to live here. And we know that we can't completely solve this, but creating complete communities means there's a place for everyone. When we say let's get rid of single family zoning, all of us fell in love with our neighborhood and we kind of like it the way it is. So we've got to start to talk about these policies in different ways, and also to honor cities and their roles and elected officials in cities. So creating incentives for cities to take growth where it makes sense along these transit corridors, or at least the stations where we've made these enormous investments in sound transit, creating incentives for density in those places. And my own personal, as you and I have discussed before, surface parking lots that don't service anymore and are ripe for development because they already have services and they already have transit, and our folks can age in place right there. So I always think about Bridle Trails and the Houghton Center and others that we've discussed in the past. So we've got a lot of work to do, and it's our most important job. Thanks for the question.
Thank you. Senator Cooter.
Thank you, Mary Robinson, and thanks for the question, Councilmember Barksdale. You know, the missing middle, the idea behind it is to leverage existing infrastructure and to have infill where it makes the most sense, and that's why it was limited to certain types. But there is the tension, as Rep. Wallen talked about, between the local control and the state having a mandate. And what I look at is we have to, over the interim, we will be having conversations with our cities, and I will be having them with you, about what a floor would look like for the entire state in terms of what the missing middle should look like, because we know that we need to build more. We're down nearly 250,000 homes right now, and it's going to take a while to build that. And that's why it's so important to be able to remove obstacles where we can. For example, we sunset the municipal corporation community councils. And so we did that, but we're also trying to incentivize ways of increasing housing and density where it makes the most sense, mainly near transit centers, and then feathering out from there. So I welcome your ideas. This is a very difficult issue. It's also an incredibly important issue, as Rep. Wallen talked about. This is one of the foundational issues of our time, and it also directly ties into homelessness. And I have said this before, I just said it tonight to another city. Homelessness is a solvable problem. It's going to take more than one solution, but it is a solvable problem. And it is way, way, way cheaper for us to make sure that someone has a roof over their head than it is for them to be chronically homeless. And I think that that's true not just in the hard expenses, the taxpayer costs, but it's also true in the lost productivity of that individual or that family. So I'm committed to that. I know there are solutions to it, and I'm more than happy to speak with you about how we can create more and different types of affordable housing for all Washingtonians. And thanks again for the question.
Thank you. Well, I think you recognize we have a very engaged council here who are eager to work with you all again in the next session and tackle some of the remaining issues and emerging issues as they come along. Thank you so much for being here tonight. We feel so lucky to have you representing us, and it's really an honor to have you all here at our meeting. So thank you. We are going to move on to our federal issues. So anybody who's not on the council, who doesn't want to hang out for that don't hesitate to sign off. Mr. Miyake, you already introduced this. So Brianna, do you want to take it from here? Or Lacey Jane, maybe you do?
That's right, Mayor.
Lacey Jane. Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor. I think I'll take it from here. One note about your regional issues packet tonight. It does include a draft MOU for the East Trail with a slight change. So we wanted to share it with you tonight in your packet, and it will be coming back on your consent agenda on next week, April 18th. So now turning to our federal legislative agenda, and having just had a great discussion about state legislative matters. I know that you all are aware that the bipartisan infrastructure law, which was recently passed, offers an unprecedented opportunity for the city of Bellevue and other cities to pursue infrastructure funding, which are among our greatest priorities. So Bellevue staff worked with our federal contract lobbyists, Washington 2 advocates. And tonight we have here with us Tony Williams, who is chairman and partner at W2A. And we together worked to draft a federal legislative agenda for you all that is based on your adopted council vision and priorities. One thing that Tony and his partner at W2A, Nina Collier, have helped me understand is the importance of prioritizing among the many things that are important to the city of Bellevue and that we would like to pursue in the next 2 years. And so what we did with your council priorities to develop this draft was we then screened those against looking for projects that are shovel ready, i.e. we're ready to request federal funding for those projects in the next year or two, and are expected to have federal funding available in the next year or two. And that helped us arrive at what we believe to be a good set of priorities that will give direction to staff and help the city of Bellevue have a consistent message about what our asks are of our federal legislators. So that is the draft that is in front of you tonight, and we are very interested to hear your feedback on that. But first, I would love to hand things off to Tony Williams to say a few words about how we interact with our federal delegation, since he and Nina help lead us and guide us on that work.
Well, hello, everybody, and thanks for having me here. So first, it was great to go through this process with all of you. Nina and I learned a lot about from the council's standpoint, each of the issues and priorities that are important to you. And so one, it's just good to have that chance with you. Also, we did a similar process with all the department heads and attempted to kind of get our hands and arms around various priorities and issues there. And so one, that was kind of the first step of all this. Then it's, what the heck's going on in DC, and where can we create the right math of our priorities and where they're spending money and where we have people in the delegation who can help us get it. So that's kind of what the magic is of what we're trying to do here. So unlike the state, which has already had its legislative session and is, the work in DC is just beginning on this year. They just finished last year's appropriations bills, and now they're beginning to start the process on this year. I was actually back there last week, and it's still a wee bit of an awkward time as in terms of how to engage with our congressional delegation. The buildings are kind of open. People are kind of having meetings in person, but that's an ever-changing process. Secondly, as it relates to our work here, the administration yet, the federal various agencies and whatnot have not finished their rules and regulations around all these various funding opportunities we've been talking about, the big bipartisan infrastructure bill. We expect those to come out soon. But what is interesting is the delegation themselves are very interested in what various local governments, and of course I've talked to them about the city of Bellevue, what our needs are, what we're applying for, and how can they help us go get those funds. I mean, in particular, it was in a fascinating discussion with Senator Cantwell's office last week, and the legislative assistant who was on that, we were talking about energy, and she wanted to quickly pivot to salmon funding for a bit and say, hey, by the way, Senator Cantwell put a lot of money in there for salmon recovery funding, including culverts, and she wants to see every city out there applying for grant funding. And so, one of the things we've already done, we've already, had some discussions with Senator Cantwell's office around the city's particular priorities, but we're going to go back to them now and say, okay, so here's the things we're working on so that we're applying for the right grants and that they're ready to help us. So one, that's an example of how we interact with our delegation. And then the other way we're interacting with our delegation right now is around earmarked funding. And so those are congressionally directed spending amounts that go in the appropriations bills, that are the bills that Congress has to pass every year to fund the government. And, members are allowed to, put in 3 or 4 requests. They generally are on the smaller side, generally in the $750,000 to $1 million. We received one, the city of Bellevue. We did get one in the FY22 bill. Those are the bills that were just approved in March. I think it was about $900,000. Lacey Jane can give you more of the details on exactly what it was for. So that was exciting, for us to get one of those. So we're beginning to prepare our earmark requests, and so those were mostly due last week. It depends on the office when they're going to be due, but they're going to be due here. Most of them are due like right now. So we're very focused on that. And then I guess the last thing as it relates to this agenda that you have here, we also have produced a work plan that is not part of this discussion, but a big part of that work plan, as we talked about when we met with all of you, is trying to find opportunities for all of you on the council to essentially help us advocate with members of the delegation and try and match you up with a member. Say if we have a priority that is one that you're particularly passionate about or have experience on, and we've got a request in there, it'd be great to have each of you available to perhaps meet with a member of our delegation at the right time to help make the case, make a connection and make the case. And so that's kind of what we're up to. And I think I think we have a lot of potential for success. And I just thank you guys for engaging with us so much. It was a great process. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony, very much. Lacey Jane, anything else you want to add before we open this up?
Mayor, that concludes the staff presentation. We would love feedback from council to know whether this draft federal legislative agenda hits the mark for what your priorities are and where you would like staff to focus and what you would like us to help you communicate to legislators. And look forward to hearing your comments.
Great, thank you. We'll start with Councilmember Lee, followed by Councilmember Barksdale.
Thank you. Hi, Tony.
Hello, Conrad.
Appreciate your work and the report. As you probably know, I've been working on this for over 20 some years. I go to DC every year trying to figure out, and of course things have come and changed and go and all that. So appreciate what you guys been doing. But I think we have an opportunity this year, obviously, with how many $1.5 trillion of infrastructure money. I don't know, when are they ready to dish out, but so that's something that you would know, and I appreciate you doing this. My question is, I look at a federal legislative agenda, but it seems to be very general. Like you just heard, we talked the state legislature. It's pretty specific, because otherwise, how are they going to know what is there, what's appropriate? Because it has to match up with the agency's priority somewhat, right? So they need to understand what it is. So that's one thing. So you cover almost everything, basically. So, but that's my first question. So to be specific, that means we need to talk about, so as we talk to the state, autonomous vehicle, electronic, EV technology, they talk about AI, because this permeates throughout many of the city's priorities: transportation, climate change, environment, Vision Zero, right? And we talk about housing even, economic development, that's all very part and parcel. And when you talk about transportation, we're talking about working with metro, working with light, with sound transit, and various other jurisdictions as well, and including corporations. So what I'm thinking is, in order to get earmark or whatever that meets the federal interest agency, we got to be a little more specific. So I'm trying to figure out what that might be that you can support us, help us to better, craft it. And you mentioned you talked to the staff, you talked to the council members. I'm just curious, what did you find as that we agree on? If the staff feels that way, council feels another way, you would be in trouble, right? You say, well, gee, what's your priority? So I hope that based on what you have done, you can bring us to the same page. Then we can focus on what specific we can bring to the federal government. You mentioned about we have $900,000 in 2022 funding. I'm just curious what that might be. So maybe Lacey Jane can tell me that. But other than that, I just already said that, I would like to see some specifics and see if it's consistent, compatible with what federal government's spending priority are. If we are the same, we have a much better chance. If we don't, you mentioned we were going to do this for shovel-ready projects. I don't know what other shovel projects we have for the next couple of years. And are we going to miss the boat if we wait for a couple of years? Or so what's this timeline? That's all. So these are the things we might want to know a little bit more. So it's a mouthful, but I hope, you can.
Thank you, Councilmember Lee.
Thank you.
It's funny, when I look at this draft federal legislative agenda, I see so many of the specific things you, Councilmember Lee, have brought up in so many different conversations. So I'm seeing a lot of the council represented here, but I will let Tony answer those questions.
Yeah, so on the specific component, our job is to show you where the funding opportunities are. And And as I said, as it relates to the bipartisan infrastructure legislation, they're still sorting out, meaning the federal government is still sorting out what those opportunities might be. So once we know what the specific boundaries are around whatever those pots of money are, then we will share that with the team in the city, and then we'll begin to look for specific projects that we can go advocate for. And so it is a little bit of a, whatever your favorite terminology is, chicken and an egg thing or something like that. But part of the reason, right, it's sort of, we wanted to put up there, okay, let's be mindful about what are the kind of key priorities. We don't need to be super specific right now. We need to be clear about where we're going to be seeking funding opportunities. And then, as things begin to develop, whether it's whether the infrastructure legislation, what those grant opportunities look like, once we see those, then we'll match up where those funding pots are with items in our agenda. And then secondly, the looking ahead to the FY23 appropriations process, the president just put out his budget about a month ago. Congress will begin to have hearings on their spending bills and begin to outline where they're going to be spending money. And as we go through that, then again, we'll look for more opportunities. So that's just kind of how it works. And so, one of the things to take into mind with what we've got here is, this is not a static document. This is an evergreen document. And what I mean by that is, Nina and our job is to be opportunistic for you. And when we see, okay, here's some funding, some emphasis on some funding, let's get together and find out where we can compete with projects. And then, it kind of works that way, as opposed to us saying, here's 10 projects we want funding. Well, we can list all the projects we want, and if they're not funding them, we're not going to get any money for them. So, that's why we sort of kind of go through the steps we're going through here.
Thank you. Good explanation. Let's see, we have Councilmember Barksdale and then Councilmember Zahn.
All right, thank you. Thanks, Tony and Brianna, for the work in meeting with all of us and capturing the needs and interests. I also thought it was a really good set of priorities that were laid out and focused. So thank you for that. I only had a minor request, and that is when we talk about small business can be a relatively speaking, a pretty large business. And so I wanted to know if we could clarify by adding language that focuses on micro businesses as well, just because they have a harder time really moving out of that micro stage into a small business and maybe into something greater. And so I would love if we could bring that forward a bit more in the language, maybe just by saying micro business and small business.
You bet.
Absolutely, council member. That's a change we can easily make on our end. So thank you for that. It's a great point.
Thank you.
Councilmember Zahn.
Yes, thank you for the presentation. And I'm excited that we are relaunching our federal priorities. I was blessed to be able to go back to DC for the National League of Cities. And this particular time, there were two things they talked about: the ARPA funding for recovery and the bipartisan infrastructure law. So what we heard was that and I have to tell you, the National League of Cities still calls him Mayor Pete. So the head of DOT is forever Mayor Pete. And what we also learned is that the head of the bipartisan infrastructure law, Mitch Landry, used to be a former mayor of New Orleans. So this is very good for cities, because what we heard is that they're trying to streamline the grant process so we can apply for fill out one application and it goes to multiple grants, that they're pivoting from 4 programs to 23. So Tony, as you talked about, they're still trying to sort out the process and the application. But I'm really excited about us being positioned well from the safe systems approach for the Vision Zero dollars. And I would say that I think this then becomes a multi-pronged approach of, yes, we want to leverage the delegation and the earmarks. And with the BIL, they are specifically targeting monies that only go to cities, and we're only competing with other cities, which is really great. And I think the only thing I might add to take a look at the priorities is what I also heard was the word shovel worthy, which is how do we look at using the money to reconnect communities? So one of the grants they talked about was reconnecting communities like a lidded park, which we have one of those with our grant connection. The Safe Streets program, where what we heard is that a number of the dollars are actually specifically focused on planning efforts. So I'd like for us to look at, for those projects that are not shovel ready yet, how we actually get access to the planning dollars so that we're actually able to leverage not just in the build side, but in the planning for the build side. And my sense is that we're really well positioned with the work we've already done to be in the leading edge for a lot of our safe systems approach. And then as we think about our Grand Connection work and our electric infrastructure work that Councilmember Lee talked about. So I think there's a lot of things in the transportation side. I also heard some things around economic development and business around immigration reform. So making sure that if there's an appetite at the federal level to start looking at that are there things that we can position ourselves for that as well? Because we are 40% people from outside of our country in Bellevue. So I see a lot of that as possibilities. So I think we need to take a look at our priorities and make sure we have those items identified. Also heard that the Department of Justice has some community funding for body cams and back-end systems, which we're certainly also working on. So I think there's a number of things here, and just excited we're going to have our priorities. And I'm assuming, Lacey Jane, that if we learn more and we want to position ourselves even stronger, that after we pass the priorities, we can always update them with new information so that we can be really clear about all of the things that we can position ourselves for more funding. Is that correct?
That's absolutely right, Councilmember Zahn. And I think you heard Tony use the word evergreen, which I think is a great word and very Pacific Northwest of you to say, Tony. And Councilmember Zahn, we always appreciate the information you bring back from NLC and other sources. So thank you so much for those comments, and we will keep that in mind.
Yeah, and then lastly, I would just say, if there's something we want to bring back to the National League of Cities, I was honored to join their board of directors this year for 2 years, 2 years. And so there's an opportunity to leverage the broader National League of Cities to move forward on different things of interest to Bellevue as well. So thank you.
I'll go next. And if anybody else wants to go after me, just please raise your hand. I really like this. We talked about from here on, I really want everything to be sustainable and equitable in everything that we do. And that permeates this document in a way that I really appreciate. We have opportunities for growth in Wilburton. We have opportunities for growth in Bel Red and Eastgate, and anything that we can apply for federal funding that will create equitable and sustainable development. I think, the city has a real strong appetite for, and that means, low energy emission development buildings, alternative modes of transportation, affordable housing on the full spectrum, giving people opportunities to live in our city, people from all different kinds of walks of life and different job incomes. And so I feel like this really supports that goal for me. And I thank you for incorporating that language into this. I also want to say that our representatives were incredibly responsive to us in the last 2 years, especially during COVID. And Senator Patty Murray, boy, did she really bring it for us. All the emergency funding that the city received, she was in contact with us constantly, getting data from our human service providers, finding out what the needs were and where the funding needed to go. I am so grateful to the responsiveness of our representatives and our Senate, our congressmen and our senators. And so I just want to say that I'm very gratified for that. And Tony, you've been very helpful in maintaining those connections and carrying our message. So please keep it up. Councilmember Stokes, followed by the Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, I want to thank you all both very, very much on this as well. I'm just looking at something here on my screen, and it's called an agenda. And I think the point is, and I think this is a really great agenda. It's not a detailed, exposition of everything we want to look at, and that's the next conversation, I think. And so it's not designed to go into specifics or how many dollars or what these others. So I think that's a good approach to have this agenda, have a over framework in. It's what we're talking about. So the next step, and I think we should adopt it, is great. And the next step is what are the issues are the specifics we want under these pieces? And that's the next thing. And like you say, and it's fluid, and it can be. And that's when we have these conversations, which will take us a long time about how much do we need, 200 million or just $1.5 million on these, and what are these other pieces? So it's really good work and appreciate it, and look forward to working with both of you going forward on this. And I think we're in a really good trajectory on this. And as the mayor said, we have, our representatives are just really, really good at working with us, and very effective in the legislature. So in the Congress. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor?
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I'm ready to move this forward and adopt this as well. Just want to take a moment to thank Tony and Nina and Lacey Jane for working so hard on this agenda. And Tony, I appreciate you kind of laying out the process here. I appreciate Councilmember Lee for asking in terms of how this works, and your approach to secure these funds for us in these, vastly different areas. But I think you've just captured everything quite well, and appreciate the time you took to really dig in with staff and with our council to really understand where the key areas of focus are for the city of Bellevue and where our interests lie. The only question that I had, because I believe we talked a little bit about timeline, but I'm just curious, Tony, when you think there might be some updates, and what we might have a chance for funding, other areas that we've backed off because it doesn't look like we have a solid chance. We're putting our efforts into these three areas, because I love the agenda, but I mean, it's hard to chase everything. And I think that's part of your process is finding out where we have the best, chance of success, and to really focus in on those and attack those, and hopefully bring some funding in some of those key areas. So we'd love to know when we can hear back from you and how things are going, and go from there.
Yeah, that's a great, all of these comments are right on point. And so I appreciate that. And, so in terms of check-in, Lacey and Jane and I were talking about that a little bit this morning. So it is, again, once these sort of, I call them rules and regulations, however they're deciding they're going to put these dollars out and make it how they're going to have us compete for them. Mm-hmm. Nina and I'll put something together that will be, obviously shared with all of you, and then we'll go into game planning with everybody here. And so we're hoping that it's soon. I can tell you that every member of Congress running for re-election in November who voted for the bipartisan infrastructure legislation is anxiously awaiting for those. They want to get to work on those. So, that came out very clearly last week. So one, there's that. The second thing is, I was thinking that it would be a good idea to have Nina and I come back in what I call the mid-year. So, the calendar's different back there. So by mid-year, I mean September, October. So, there's sort of this grinding away through the summer, and then you get to the fall and the plans begin to be made for how they're going to finish the year. And they will undoubtedly have a continuing resolution in September that keeps the government operating until the end of the year. They'll go have elections, and then there'll be a session that happens between the middle of November and Christmas. So it'd be good for us to come back around that time, right after Labor Day, and talk about two things. One, give you a good solid update to Conrad's questions about specifics. Here are the specific areas where we're seeking funding, and here's who's supporting us, and here's how that process is going. And secondly, let's talk about how the year is going to wrap up back there, and that gets to these appropriations bills. And I know it's a little confusing to follow the process for me. You know, it's so ingrained in me, it's easy to think about it, but they are two very separate processes. One is the here and now, which are those grants and all those, and then the other one is looking prospectively at what the budget priorities are going to be and what Congress is going to pass in there in all those funding bills by the end of the year. So I'd like to come back and kind of brief you all on that. Last thing I say, I know we need to wrap up because you guys have a lot of other things on your agenda. You know, I'm glad we're on offense here. You know, we have a delegation that wants to find ways to connect in with the city, its residents, and all 7 of you, you know, and find issues to work on together. They read the same papers you all read. They know what's going on here, and they're trying to figure out how to connect in with us, which is why one of the reasons we decided to have the agenda be you know, more high level, so that in fact they get to look at it and say, hey, you know, I didn't know you guys cared about some issues that I really wasn't thinking about. I was thinking transportation, but maybe I wasn't thinking environmental issues, or maybe I wasn't thinking some of these issues regarding criminal justice or whatever they might be. Let's give them a chance to say, hey, I want to connect with you guys and work together with you. So I think we're finding a lot of desire from our delegation to be like that. And then, you know, it's a great time to be on offense. There's money out there, and we should go compete for it for our citizens. And, you know, as a business owner in Bellevue, I'm glad we're going to go do that.
Great.
Love it. Thanks, Tony.
You bet.
Well, thank you. So we have an option here, but I'd like to speak with Councilmember Barksdale for a moment. You brought up something you wanted added to this agenda, and you received assurances that it could be added. Are you comfortable with voting this in tonight, understanding that your changes that you're hoping for will be made, or do you want to go put this on consent for next time and during the week look at the revisions?
I'm confident the changes will be made, or maybe we could just say acknowledge it in the motion.
I don't think we have to do that, but if you're comfortable, I think you've received assurances.
Yep.
So
that works for me.
Okay, good. All right. So Deputy Mayor, would you like to make a motion here?
Certainly, Mayor. I move to adopt the draft 2022-2023 federal legislative agenda.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Terrific. Well, thank you. Very good conversation and presentation. Thank you so much. We are going to take a break. It's 7:37, and we'll come back at 7:45. City Clerk, could you please tell me if anybody has signed up for oral communications?
Thank you, Mayor. No one has signed up to speak this evening. If there are any members of the public connected to the meeting that would like to speak and did not pre-register, please use the raise hand function in Zoom if you are connected with a computer, or use *9 to raise your hand if you are connected with a telephone. And it looks like we have got one person that has raised their hand, Heidi Dean. Can you hear me, Heidi?
Maybe, Karin, we could ask her to send us an email of what she was going to say or ask, and we can respond at our next meeting.
Yeah, I'm not sure why she is not able to speak right now.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Is there a way to call in differently, or is this the only way to do it?
She could try to phone in, but I'm not sure.
Usually people can hear us even though we can't hear them. So maybe you could provide those instructions.
Yeah. So seeing no other hands raised at the moment, that therefore ends oral community. Oh, did she just move over? No, I still don't see her. Seeing no other hands raised at the moment, that ends oral communications.
Do you want to provide her with the phone number in case she wants to call in?
I actually do not have the number available right at the moment. Let me see if I can get it.
Mayor, I could offer the number if you wish.
Do you know it? Okay, sure.
You can call 253-215-8782.
Okay, we'll just give it a couple of minutes here and see if.
And then if needed, the webinar ID is 981-6779-1723.
Okay, do you want to, is there anything else we can do, Karen, or should we move on?
I don't know how to reach out to her to contact her, and I don't see that she's rejoined.
Okay, well, she, I know that staff has her email address, so we can reach out to her.
Yep.
I think Michelle's on the call here. And ask her to go ahead and email us questions or comments.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So we have 2 study session items tonight. Mr. Miyake, would you like to introduce the first one?
So, hey, Mayor, I believe we have a
am I missing something?
Consent calendar first, Mayor.
Yeah, consent calendar.
Oh, sorry about that.
No worries.
Okay, is there a motion to approve the consent calendar?
I move to approve the consent calendar.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, now I believe we're on to our study session items. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you, Mayor Robinson and council members. You have 2 topics on your study session agenda this evening. And the first one is a review of the Transportation Commission's recommendation for the Mobility Implementation Plan, which represents an essential component of the city's multimodal platform. Tonight, staff seeks council direction to return at a future meeting with a resolution to adopt the Mobility Implementation Plan. Additionally, the Transportation Commission seeks direction to work with the transportation staff to prepare a recommendation for amendments to the Traffic Standards Code, which is consistent with the 2021 annual amendments to the comp plan and the Mobility Implementation Plan. So joining us this evening is Andrew Singalossis, Director, and Kevin McDonald, Principal Planner, both from the Transportation Department. And we're honored to have joining us Loriana Marciante, who is the Chair of the Transportation Commission. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Andrew to begin the presentation.
Thanks. And Kevin, if you could just bring up the PowerPoint. Well, thank you, City Manager Miyake, Mayor Robinson, Deputy Mayor Neuenhuis, and members of the council. And unfortunately, Loriana Marciante is ill today and can't join us at the meeting tonight. However, you do have the letter that came in from the Transportation Commission, the transmittal. It was a unanimous recommendation to send it to the council. Next slide, please. And as Brad mentioned, the last time you saw this was in December when you approved comprehensive plan amendments to enable multimodal concurrency. And this multimodal work has been in progress for many years to address the rapid transformation of our city. We are a different community than we were back in the 1980s and 90s when our current automobile-oriented standards for concurrency were developed. And this does not mean that the automobile is not important. It will still be, capacity projects still will be the majority of the transportation dollars that are in our CIP. But with the mobility implementation plan, we have an approach to transportation that considers all modes. And it helps us to develop a transportation equitable and sustainable way to prioritize our transportation investments. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kevin.
Thank you, Andrew. Good evening, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, Council members. The direction that staff seeks tonight, to reiterate the city manager's long recital of the option one is to return on April 18th with the resolution to adopt the mobility implementation plan. But our work is not done with that adoption. The mobility implementation describes a multimodal approach to concurrency, and we seek direction to work with the Transportation Commission to amend the regulations with respect to concurrency, the traffic standards code. So the outline tonight for you is a review of the recommended mobility implementation plan as approved by the Transportation Commission. I'll try, it's a 74-page document. I'll try to condense it into as concise a summary as I can. It does cover the topic of multimodal concurrency, a very important topic for Bellevue's growing land use and multimodal approach to mobility. And there's 5 different components to the mobility implementation plan, and I'll go over those briefly and express that this plan was not developed in a vacuum, but there was an extensive amount of public involvement involved in the development of the plan. And I'll briefly describe what's next in the process. So there's 2 major components to this mobility implementation plan. Again, the multimodal concurrency policies that the Commission adopted back in June, moved through the annual comprehensive plan amendment process through the Planning Commission, and went to the Council for approval in December of 2021. The policies that the Council approved support a multimodal approach to mobility, but they're planning level policies, and the policies refer to the mobility implementation plan for the details of how the policy would be implemented. So the bulk of the mobility implementation plan is those details. It describes what the approach is to multimodal concurrency. It describes the performance metrics and performance targets for each of the modes of transportation. It defines geographic areas that the Commission refers to as performance management areas that are a combination of land use and transportation options that have succinct categories within the city. And then significantly, the MIP describes a project identification and prioritization process that helps us take the universe of mobility projects for all modes and sort of identifies the higher priority ones that can be moved forward to the Council for consideration for funding. So to reiterate the policy that the Council adopted in December, the TR 28 expresses that we should employ a multimodal approach to concurrency. That approach is consistent with the requirements of the Growth Management Act, and it's actually compatible with what our neighbors do in Redmond and Kirkland. Everybody's got a little bit different approach to concurrency, but this approach, this multimodal approach in Bellevue is compatible with that of our neighbors. To implement the multimodal concurrency policy is the upcoming multimodal concurrency code. Staff is sort of working on some of the components of that right now, and we'll receive direction from the Council later on how to proceed. But basically, the concurrency code is a supply and demand calculation with the supply of mobility of all modes being made available through the CIP, the funded transportation projects. And the demand for mobility is expressed by the new trips generated by new development of all types in the city. So when concurrency is achieved, when the supply of mobility is greater than or equal to the demand for mobility. You will see all the details of that as staff brings forward recommendation for the concurrency code. So there's four main goals of the mobility implementation plan. Of course, always important is to enhance safety wherever we can. This is compatible with the Vision Zero safe systems approach that Council has authorized and staff is pursuing right now. One of the goals is to enhance equity wherever we can, to identify and prioritize those projects that ensure that people can get around the city with whatever means they want to whatever destinations they're intending to go. The mobility implementation plan is intended to support growth, and in the effort of supporting that growth, do so in a multimodal fashion. And the access and mobility part of the mobility implementation plan is to make sure that there's connections that help people to reach their destination. Fundamental component of the MIP is what the Commission is calling the layered network, making sure that we don't plan in isolation, but instead integrate land use and transportation so that planning for all those different important parts is compatible, and that we're making sure that all of the components work together in that layered network approach. The bulk of the MIP describes the performance metrics and the performance targets for each mode. Performance metrics are what would be measured, and the performance target is the user experience when they're using any particular mode. So for the pedestrian network, the performance metrics and what we measure are sidewalks and the frequency of crossings of the arterial network. For the bicycle facilities, or the bicycle network, the type of bicycle facility describes both the metric and the target. For transit, travel speed is important on the frequent transit network. That frequent transit network is comprised of buses that use our arterials between activity centers within the city, and also the light rail system that's about to serve the major activity centers of downtown Bellevue and Overlake. The transit network, access to the transit network is really important. The mobility implementation plan describes how the city can affect people's ease of getting to and from transit and the amenities that they experience at the bus stops. And as Andrew mentioned, the MIP still considers vehicles a high priority in the vehicle network, both at intersections and along corridors are key components of the mobility implementation plan. The Commission has described three different types of performance management areas. These essentially collapse the mobility management areas that were in the old comprehensive plan into three different types based on the land use characteristics and mobility options, with the type 1 PMA, performance management area, being the high density mixed use areas of the city that have or will have light rail as one of the mobility options serving them. And those are represented by downtown Bellevue and the Wilburton East Main area. The type 2 performance management areas are less dense and have slightly less mobility options. Specifically, there is not currently light rail serving the type 2 PMAs of Crossroads, Eastgate, and Factoria. The type 3 performance management areas are the rest of the city, largely lower density residential areas, although there's pedestrian destinations within that giant green field of land use within the city. Schools and parks and shopping and transit access are important mobility considerations within the type 3 performance management area. And as I mentioned earlier, project identification is really important, and prioritization will help the council make decisions on the capital investment program. And the reason is because when we are doing our monitoring of the performance targets under the mobility implementation plan, it will identify lots of gaps, places where the performance of the system does not meet the user expectation. That's a performance target gap. That's a location where we should look to see if there's an improvement that we could make with an investment to help improve that performance. but we recognize, and it's budget season, I know, and we recognize resources are limited and projects are many. Therefore, we do have to go through a prioritization process. And the initial screening of that prioritization process is the mobility implementation plan goals. Does a project that meets, that helps to fill that performance target gap meet the goals of the MIP? And then if it does, that project can then go through other considerations of related to land use, environmental constraints, fiscal responsibilities, et cetera, to come up with a project list that becomes a candidate for the CIP. I mentioned public involvement earlier, and there was a lot of public involvement in this process, but specifically the Transportation Commission. I give them credit for doing a lot of this work through the course of 20 study sessions after the council initiated this project. Not only did they do a lot of work during live commission meetings, but we had a lot of briefings with commissions offline so that people could really understand the nuts and bolts of the mobility implementation plan. And also as part of the council meeting or commission meetings, written and oral communications were part of the public record to establish this MIP. All of the information in the MIP is made available to the public through the website that was active very early on in the process and was updated frequently as new information became available. We provided briefings to local organizations like the BDA, the Chamber, our friends at the East Side Transportation Association, kind of the Regional American Planning Association group. And of course, we worked through the Planning Commission and the East Bellevue Community Council as well on development of policies and part of the mobility implementation plan. And the commission sort of contributed to the questions and the analysis of the responses through a questionnaire that was hosted on Engaging Bellevue through the summer of 2021. 566 people took the time to respond to that questionnaire, and a lot of the information that they provided was embodied in the MIP. So tried to condense the timeline, the really long timeline, into something that fit on the page. But again, the commission met 20 separate times on the mobility implementation plan. City council, of course, was engaged along the way in indicating, as indicated in this timeline by the brown points of time on the calendar. We worked with the Planning Commission again to develop the multimodal concurrency policies that you approved in December. And we had 3 engagements with the East Bellevue Community Council, specifically related to the policies, because that was their role, but they also provided information relevant to the content of the mobility implementation plan itself. So to summarize, the 74-page document supports Bellevue's transformation, ongoing transformation to a more urban center in a way that's sustainable, equitable, and of course, multimodal. The MIP doesn't necessarily prescribe everything that we should do, but it provides the tools that give us the capacity to analyze concurrency, to make sure that we're doing the right performance measuring in terms of the metrics and the targets, and identifies a process that we can use to identify and prioritize projects of all modes that will contribute to a complete and comprehensive transportation network that serves everybody in Bellevue. I speak on behalf of the Transportation Commission, I guess, tonight, because our chair is not able to join us, but our Transportation Commission really dug into this work, and they really appreciated the responsibility that you gave them to do this really important and really transformational work for the city of Bellevue. I want to acknowledge our former council liaison, Jennifer Robertson, who also can't be here with us tonight. She was instrumental in helping to guide the commission, and our current council liaison, Janice Zahn, who goes way back with multimodal mobility during her work on the Transportation Commission back in the mid 20-teens. A lot of the work that she did when she was on the commission is foundational to the work that the commission approved back in March and is before you tonight for consideration. And with that, the next slide is the direction, but I'll pause now and go back to this slide to see if you have any questions or comments on the mobility implementation plan. Thank you very much.
Terrific. Great presentation. Thank you very much. And Councilmember Zahn, this is kind of full circle for you. So I'm going to let you go first, followed by Councilmember Barksdale, Councilmember Lee, and then the Deputy Mayor. Go ahead, Councilmember Zahn.
Yes, well, thank you. Thank you to Kevin and the whole Transportation Commission. I do remember us talking about concurrency and the multimodal level of service, even when I was on the Transportation Commission, what was that, 5-6 years ago. So it's exciting to see it come to fruition in having this mobility implementation plan, and especially because it is sustainable, equitable, and multimodal, and it positions us so well for what we were talking about earlier around federal and state funding to even move our implementation plan faster. So I'm super excited about both the integrated, interconnected systems approach, as well as what you mentioned, Kevin, about the fact that this is also providing regional compatibility on concurrency with our neighboring cities. So to me, you know, transportation doesn't end in our borders. So the fact that there is alignment and consistency, I think makes everything work even better. And to me, we are going to be a really good model for other cities to take a look at what we're doing and potentially look at pieces of what we have for how we measure performance and on ped, bike, transit, as well as vehicles. So super excited about this work and so many hours that were committed to make this happen. So I really appreciate it and look forward to its adoption by the council. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Barksdale.
All right, thank you, Mayor. Many thanks, Kevin, and Transportation staff and the Transportation Commission and Council Liaison Zahn and Robertson. I just had one comment and then a question. And the comment is, you know, I would love when we do these briefings to make sure that we're including community-based organizations that are, you know, that have a pulse of, you know, the members of our community who might be most impacted or strongly impacted by the services that we provide. And I didn't see that in the list. And I think that's something that I would like us to do in the future and not just assume that they're going to reply to the survey or engage as individual community members. My question is, I didn't really see much and I have the plan up here on my screen on performance targets and performance metrics. Transit is there and it seems to mean bus, and even in some of the language where it's, you know, % of bus stops in the frequent transit network that include all 5 passenger amenities. And I guess was there discussion about including light rail in this? And before you answer, I appreciate the conversation before council. I know that it's not in our control, but from our community members' perspective, they don't know whose control what is in. And I think we're missing an opportunity to really tie together how the system, where there are gaps in the system if we're not measuring it just because it's not within our control.
Councilmember Barksdale, can I respond real quick to both of those comments?
Yeah, thank you.
Through our neighborhood outreach people, we did reach out to every neighborhood organization that we could think of, having them invite us to their meeting if they wanted to hear more about this. Nobody invited us except for the groups that I showed on the slide. So we tried. With respect to transit, one of the things that the commission wanted to make sure, and you correctly characterize this, is they wanted to make sure the mobility implementation plan identified the types of mobility components that the city could control, therefore be accountable for in terms of budgeting and prioritization. One thing the commission did note is that in the comprehensive plan itself, there is a lot of policy related to transit. There's about 40 policies in the comprehensive plan that talk about transit, and about 20 of those are specific to high capacity transit. That the planning for it, the design of the system, the components of the station, the construction, and the service provision is all identified in the comprehensive plan. So the commission didn't necessarily want to be duplicative of work that had already been done in the context of the comp plan.
Great, I appreciate that reply. On the community-based organizations, I guess I'm thinking more of like the not just neighborhoods, but more like IAWW or IACS, Central Culture Mexicano. I'm thinking about those organizations that also reflect people of color. But so maybe happy to follow up offline with that. Although we don't have direct control over light rail, just like we don't have direct control over bus transit, I understand that they operate on our streets. But I do think it's an opportunity to understand the other metrics and context of trying to access transit and light rail. And I guess my ask would be, and I'm curious what other council members think, would at least to include some language so that it's transit is explicitly accounting for bus and light rail. And we don't have to define performance metrics tonight, but I guess I would like for it to speak, if we're talking about all modes, light rail is a mode among all the modes, and I would really like to see some language that acknowledges that in the mobility implementation plan. Because I think there are some things that we do have control over that are tangential to light rail.
And we've worked on some language that we could insert into the document when we bring it back next week, just to characterize what light rail, how it relates being the spine basically of our transit system in the city. We could put that into the document that you see next week.
Okay, and maybe a similar language in the targets and metrics, if we could, just to acknowledge it. That's part of what will be measured too.
Kevin, do you want to take that?
Councilmember Barksdale, we'll have you take another leap of faith that staff can incorporate the comments that you have. I've actually been thinking about what you've been telling us over the last week or so as we've engaged in offline briefings, and I've tried to create some draft language that can be embedded in the mobility implementation plan for your approval next week.
Thank you. I appreciate the consideration. So
maybe you could provide an edited version in the packet next week so we can see what the changes are.
Yep, happy to do that.
Okay, and Councilmember Lee, I think we owe you some gratitude for all your work on the Transportation Commission as well. So thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you. I appreciate you mentioning that, and I thank the staff mentioning about Councilman Robertson and Zhang. And actually, I was the liaison before Councilmember Robertson, and in fact, I was on the first Transportation Commission that was established by City of Bellevue. And that's when we're talking about concurrency. And so concurrency, after 28 years, is finally coming to a much better standards, that we are been struggling to provide. So I'm very happy, very proud that this multimodal implementation, mobility implementation plan is now become real, because that reflects all the transportation working together, not separately. But that makes a lot of sense. However, I think what Councilmember Buxley just mentioned, that there's all the detail that need to be worked on. And so I'm very comfortable with the policy, which is what the council provided. But we also, in my briefing, I talked to the staff, and we agree that some details are very challenging. Number one, how to create the standard. We have to learn. We don't know everything, because they have data that I'm glad to hear that we are looking at how to make sure that we provide the right systems, that we actually build system that will be used. Our goal is to actually to reflect what the people's actual use would be. And we can, obviously provide some, estimates or guesses, but we need to make sure that we have data to make sure we can track it so we can make adjustments. So I would like to see if the staff and the commission had actually considered some of that detail. How do we make sure that it's not just built and people will come, but actually, that's not enough. What kind of incentive and carrots we may provide if we want to make sure that people use the system that we are paying money to provide. And if they don't, maybe we can make corrections, adjustments, and be flexible about it. So I think there's a certain fiscal responsibility. We need to make sure that we are getting practical implementation. And also there's trade-offs, between land use, perhaps, and other things that we see that we can come on. Technology is another one. I'm really big on that. So that's going to be some of those considerations. So if the staff might be able to say something about what the commission has really looked into, considered, and what kind of provisions that we might be making to include some of this kind of considerations. And if it is not, maybe we need to provide some language as well to make sure that, like Councilmember Boxdale mentioned, provide for, possible inclusions. So I like to maybe hear a little bit of a comment from the staff.
Mayor Robertson, may I respond?
Robinson, oh yes, of course.
Okay, Councilmember Lee, the Planning or Transportation Commission gave a lot of consideration to all the points that you mentioned. One of the things they wanted to make sure the mobility implementation plan did not do is create a formula or a prescription that led you down a path towards a specific outcome, a specific project. They intentionally left the process of identifying and prioritizing projects up to the community, creating a process and a toolkit for the community to decide what is the highest priority project that they could recommend for construction through the funding of the CIP. But the commission did identify some really important points in making sure that the performance targets are eventually addressed. Specifically, the commission wanted to make sure that the performance targets that were addressed were the ones that were completely missing in the system. The missing sidewalk system, the segment, the bicycle network that didn't have a bicycle facility on it. The commission recognized that filling the gaps is the most important thing we can do to create a complete and connected system. So they built that into the mobility implementation plan. They also wanted to make sure that the plan was responsive to the needs of the growing community. And that's why they chose those performance management areas. They recognize that those are the places that are going to have the most growth. They're going to generate the most person trips from that new growth, and therefore would be really important to make sure that the transportation network of all modes is complete and connected within and between those performance management areas. So in terms of use, how many people might use it, the commission assumed that in those higher density performance management areas, filling the gaps would create a greater amount of use, especially for the pedestrian and bicycle and transit system. Although we don't have any modeling tools to predict numerically how many people might use a specific sidewalk system, for instance.
ultimately, you mentioned, I'm glad to hear that the decision will be made by the community. I assume it will be through the Transportation Commission, right?
Yes.
And ultimately, it will be the council's budget decision, right? And we based on the information the commission will provide to us. I think that's what
correct. That's correct, Councilmember Lee.
The accountability is, okay? But
yeah.
I think if that's clear, I think that would be good. If it isn't, maybe something of that nature could be included so that, you know, we know. Thank you.
Sure. Chapter 6 in the MIP is the entire process for identification and prioritization. It certainly includes the ultimate decision maker, which is the City Council.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor, followed by Councilmember Stokes.
Thank you, Mayor. First of all, great presentation, Andrew, Kevin. Really, really well done. And really want to thank the commission for just doing incredible work on this. And Chair Marciante, if I pronounced that correctly, I hope you're feeling better if you're watching tonight, and appreciate your hard work and wish you could have joined us tonight. Just two quick questions for me, or I believe they're short questions, but first one would be, well, first a comment of love the great public outreach, really appreciate that. Would second the thoughts by Councilmember Lee and Barksdale about some additional groups perhaps that we might need to do some little extra work to do some outreach there. But still appreciate the amount of outreach that you've done. It was certainly very comprehensive. But I was also curious, because you've got all the major stakeholders here in the briefings that you did, curious if there was some additional experts or stakeholders that have a specific expertise in transportation. So I see they did some briefings with the East Side Transportation Association, but I wonder, for example, from a bike perspective, did we talk to experts like a Cascade Bicycle Club or another type of organization that would provide some input in terms of our bike facilities? So that's one question that I had. And then also during those briefings, just curious if you could share one or two examples of any concerns that they may have had, EBCC or whoever, that you or the commission tweaked the mobility implementation plan based on some of those comments. So those are the two questions that I had for you. But again, great presentation, and happy to move this forward tonight.
Thank you for the compliment and for the questions, Deputy Mayor. We did not hear specifically from the Cascade Bike Club, surprisingly. We made outreach attempts to them, but they didn't come to any of our commission meetings, nor did they invite me to a board meeting at Cascade.
Okay.
So we tried, but we can't force ourselves. But we did get a lot of comments during the briefings and in comments to the commission directly during written and oral communications. Interestingly, and I always take this as a compliment when people provide comments that are nitpicking about punctuation or lines on the map that we didn't quite get right, which was a lot of the public comment that we got, because that indicates to me that we got the substance pretty much close, right? So there were issues related to the performance targets for vehicles. As you can expect, the ETA wanted to have lower standards for vehicles, allowing for a lower volume to capacity ratio at intersections. Not to get too technical, but to go the way that would have inspired the creation of larger intersections to accommodate more traffic to achieve a better level of service, which is kind of the opposite of the way the commission wanted to go. The commission sort of decreased the performance target by about 5% at some intersections, going in downtown, for instance, from 0.95 to 1.0 as the volume to capacity ratio performance target for intersections. So the commission didn't do a lot of major adjustments relative to input on that they received from different people or organizations. But we did correct all the punctuation and the lines on the map.
Great, thanks, Kevin. And one just final comment that I really appreciate highlighting the commissioners in the presentation. I'm not sure we do that enough. They do so much great work for the city and provide this council with so much incredibly good feedback and insights that we always appreciate so much. So really appreciate you highlighting them in the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Stokes.
Yeah, this is really, really great work that's been done. You know, I've followed this the time I've been here. I haven't been on the Transportation Commission itself, but getting started with working on the light rail team and everything and on forward and all the other stuff we've done. It's just a grand progression, and you've really taken this to a high level, and I think skillfully put this forward as not just an automobile-centric mobility plan, but one that is comprehensive. And it kind of gets to that question about, which I am kind of interested in seeing the full details of how the rail system performs, how the buses perform, and other forms of transportation all fit in with cars, bikes, and people walking. I mean, it's a whole holistic thing. And I know it's a little hard to kind of put those together because there are other jurisdictions. It's not part of the Transportation Commission's purview. But just like when we were doing the light rail in starting in 2012 and on, working on that, the transportation, the roads, and all these other pieces were taken into account with that. So it all works together. And so I am interested in seeing how much we kind of assure that we, when we're talking about our road systems and our bike systems and our sidewalks and everything, that we are being cognizant of the impact that the light rail will have, and cognizant of the impact that the bus transportation system will have as well. So it is comprehensive. And I know that's, it's always hard to get these things set up because things are in they're little boxes in a sense, but so I think that's something we just keep in mind. And I appreciate the comments that have been made by all three council members here before on this. And I think it's also interesting in terms of the communication and input from the community. And it's always difficult, I think, to look at it and get community input. When you say you had 550 people responding to us, and that's from a city of 140,000 people, it kind of makes you wonder. I'm sure you got a lot more input than just that group, but they're representative. I understand that, and you took a lot of other efforts in this, so it's kind of hard to really. You have to be. I know you have to be careful not to have just the people who show up have a lot of influence on it. But it sounds to me like we've done a lot of good outreach as well in other ways. So I think that's very positive. And I think the decision making is noted is by the commission, and they make their decision recommendations, and then the final decision is made by the council. And it always is helpful when the commission really is comprehensive and does great work and comes to the council, and then it's not so much remaking decisions, but just making sure and kind of giving a little perspective to it. And it sounds to me like that's what the commission has done, and I want to give them great kudos for their work on this. And again, I think it's just important that we really make sure we do have a complete multimodal. Multimodal includes more than just what the commission has kind of direct jurisdiction over, but that we really are putting this together in a way that is comprehensive. Because when we did things like even the Eastgate land use planning back years ago, one of the most important things was the whole issue of the transportation in both ways, and particularly the bus system out in that part of the city. So again, I appreciate and hope that we keep being very comprehensive in this, because it won't work well if we're not. But I think we're on a really good path, and really excited to see this go forward and start working on the implementation on it. And again, kudos to the commission and the leadership that's been applied for all these years, from the council and from the community and from the staff. Good presentation. I'm ready to move this thing along.
Thank you. I have to say, when I read this, I was so impressed with this product, and I'm just so grateful to the Transportation Commission and Chair Marciante and all the work that everybody involved in this has done. It's a great product, and I'm very anxious to move it forward as well. Having said that, I have to say, as a physical therapist, when I look at a mobility plan, to me, the norm is somebody who has a mobility challenge, that this is who the plan is for, not for people without mobility challenges. And then we consider those who have the challenges. The norm would be the people with the challenges. And so even though I think the product is really good, moving forward, when I look at the goals of this, it's to improve safety, address equity, accommodate growth, and improve access and mobility. I would love to see the goals read something like improve safety for all, accommodate growth and improve access and mobility for all, and also include sustainability in there as a goal. Because I think even though the product is really good, I think that you need to start with some stronger goals than what we have, and we're growing so much in our understanding of what's important in our city and what our priorities are. And I think our priorities really are better reflected in making sure that whatever we do, it's for everybody, no matter what's your ability, and that we focus on sustainability as well. So that's my only comment. But I really like this implementation plan, and I'm looking forward to having it come back and approve it. So any other comments or questions? Not seeing any. So is Deputy Mayor, would you like to make a motion?
Certainly, Mayor. I move direct staff to return with a resolution to adopt the mobility implementation plan as recommended by the Transportation Commission, and direct the Transportation Commission to work with staff to prepare a recommendation for amendments to the Traffic Standards Code.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? And again, I know you know this, Kevin, but we asked for an edited in the packet so we can see what the changes are before we vote for it. Okay, terrific. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Robertson, council members.
Thank you.
Okay,
So it is 8:36. Why don't we come back at 8:46 and we'll move through our next topic at that time. Miyake, would you please introduce this last study session item?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Robinson and council members. The next topic is for this evening is a progress report on implementation of Bellevue's affordable housing strategy. And just by way of background, the strategy was adopted in June of 2017 with the purpose of improving affordable housing opportunities across the city. Also covered tonight will be a review of upcoming affordable housing actions from the current strategy. And lastly, future housing work that is being contemplated. Tonight's session is informational, and therefore no formal action is being requested from the council this evening. But obviously your questions and feedback are very much welcome. Joining us this evening are Mike Brennan, Deputy City Manager, Emil King, Assistant Director, and Tara Johnson, Comprehensive Planning Manager from the Community Development Department. So to kick this off, I'm going to hand it over to Mike.
Thanks, Mr. Miyake. Good evening, Mayor Robinson, Deputy Mayor Newman House, and council members. I'm just going to make a few opening comments on this one. The need for more affordable housing in Bellevue and housing for that matter is a subject we probably hear about or read about daily. There's really no question that this is really a critical issue for us in Bellevue and in the region. Tonight, Emil and Tara will provide an update on the progress of implementing the council's affordable housing strategy. They'll also share data on affordable housing units that have been created due to code changes, investments, and partnerships that have been adopted by the council. And also we'll discuss the work that's currently underway to meet this important and growing emerging need. Tonight, you'll also hear about a process that we've initiated to identify what we've characterized as the next right work to create affordable housing and promote housing development in the city. This effort was identified in the land use and planning work plan that the council saw a couple of weeks ago. The approach is a little different that we're taking with this work. We're going to be reaching out to various stakeholder groups to solicit input on a wide range of options to create housing and affordable housing. We've contracted with a consultant that will help us facilitate those discussions. And again, we'll be reaching out to a range of stakeholders that have an interest in housing and affordable housing in the city. So we'll be exploring options like broad policies, setting minimum housing requirements for rezoned properties, additional parking reductions near light rail, code amendments to allow detached accessory dwelling units, additional incentives to create affordable housing and additional items beyond that, including items that we may not have identified yet, but our stakeholders may identify and suggest as part of this effort. The hope is that we can find consensus on a list of priorities, understanding that the conversation will probably result in some strong opinions for and against some of these ideas as they're moving forward. So the council may expect to hear some concerns expressed along the way as we hold these conversations over the next 6 to 8 weeks. But again, the goal is to bring back to the council for your consideration the essential what we're calling the next right work to move forward to create that housing and affordable housing in the city that is so desperately needed right now to meet the growing demands of the city and of our employers that are moving into the city. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Emil and Tara, who can walk you through the work that's been done and a little bit more about our strategies to identify that next right work. Emil, Tara.
Thank you for the introduction, City Manager Miyake and Deputy City Manager Brennan. And good evening, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, and Council. Implementing the city's affordable housing strategy, as you've just heard, is one of Council's key near-term priorities and an urgent topic, as we all know. And we are addressing this through a number of initiatives that you'll be hearing about tonight. Because of the significant work on affordable housing and our city needs, we do this update to Council every 6 months to keep the topic front and center. You go to the next slide. This one's good. This briefing is for information. Go back one, Tara, please. This briefing is for information only. No action is required. We will have time at the end of the presentation for council questions or comments. Next slide, please, Tara. The agenda for tonight will cover a brief overview of the affordable housing strategy that was adopted by council in 2017, some of the recent successes of the city and other partners in funding and developing affordable housing in Bellevue. We'll highlight some of our ongoing work that includes significant code and policy work, as well as some funding processes. And finally, we'll give an overview of the process to identify the upcoming work program. So tonight you're going to be hearing about us looking back a bit at the beginning, but definitely we're going to be shifting gears to look forward during the second half of the presentation. I'll now hand things over to Tara to continue with some of our slides. Go ahead, Tara.
Thank you, Emil. Good evening, Mayor Robinson, Deputy Mayor, and Union House Council members. Just to provide a little bit of context, I know you're very familiar with this, given that we come to you twice a year, but just for those members of the public that are tuning in, the Affordable Housing Strategy was adopted in 2017 And of course, as you're very familiar with, it incorporates 21 actions under 5 overall strategies. As you'll see shortly, we've made substantive success towards the overall goal of 2,500 units within a 10-year period, with the expectation that we could certainly exceed that goal. And then, as both Emil and Mike have pointed out, we're going to be discussing the next grouping of affordable housing work that we're anticipating that will come before the council shortly. So in terms of metrics, and this is something council looks forward to, I think, with our updates, we've achieved a total of 1,500 units approximately over the last 5 years since the Affordable Housing Strategy's adoption. It does include both preservation units of 678 units, and then also shelter beds. So it incorporates all those units as part of that overall number. In addition, we also track units that are going through the entitlement process, what we call pipeline units, and those are approximately 700 units. So we're anticipating that we'll get 700 additional units in the next couple of years. So a little bit on some of our accomplishments since our last update to you, which was October of 2021. Since then, and I believe we brought this to you, the city worked very closely with King County Housing Authority and Amazon to preserve 36 units at the 0 to 30% AMI level. So that was certainly a huge success. You've also probably read announcements that Amazon is partnering with Sound Transit to produce 233 affordable units at the OMFE site. And then additionally, we've heard news that Dash and SRM are moving forward with 235 units southeast of downtown, again, partnering with Microsoft there. So some substantive successes that have occurred very recently. In addition, we also have Mary's Place that's now located in downtown Bellevue. It was an old hotel that's been utilized, and it included 98 rooms, I believe, and currently it provides 90 units of housing for families at the risk going into homelessness. It also incorporates wraparound services that are provided on site. Another very recent success is the MFTE, and we came before council. I think we had several study sessions with city council where we looked at our current program, really evaluated opportunities to improve its utilization. That went through the process in mid-2021. And since then, we've had lots of interactions with the development community moving forward and taking advantage of this program. We currently have approximately 190 affordable units through applications that have currently been approved. And then we're estimating that there may be 300 additional units that come online and take advantage of the MFT program as well in the future. In addition, as you know, we've been working internally and then presenting to City Council a program around House Bill 1590. We've come before you several times with 2 different RFPs, one for human services and the other for capital service allocation. Council awarded $1.7 million towards behavioral health services last year, and then earlier this year, I believe Council awarded $1.6 million towards LifeWire, which was on the capital side. Some recent code amendments that went through the process with Planning Commission and then moved forward to City Council at the end of last year. In November, Council approved removing occupancy limits for residential uses. So that was something that went through the state legislature. In addition, we came before you with a density bonus for faith-owned properties called the C1 density bonus. Provided a 50% additional bonus for affordable housing that's located on faith-owned and surplus and nonprofit sites. And then, of course, December of last year, the East Main LUCA that moved forward through the process did incorporate incentives for affordable housing. So we anticipate that we'll be seeing affordable housing as part of that development. Just want to mention and highlight some ongoing work that's currently occurring. Of course, the city city staff are working diligently with Microsoft, Amazon, other nonprofit institutions. We highlighted some of the partnerships that are ongoing on the OMFE and 130th site. We're also going to be bringing forward the next phase of C1, what we're calling C1 map amendments for targeted properties. And that's something council provided some direction when we brought forward the density bonus provisions last year. So that should be coming forward before council fairly soon. We also have more work that's ongoing around the House Bill 1590 program that will be coming forward to you. And staff is continuing work on producing a community engagement guide, which will be a good resource for the nonprofit community. And then we're also working on several fronts. There's a lot of work relating to affordable housing targets through our regional partners, and then also which would tie into a comprehensive plan periodic update. There's also legislation for different housing types, missing middle, which you heard a little bit about during your legislative update. And then we're actively working on pre-launch for Wilburton, which will be coming before council shortly. And with that, I'm going to hand things back to Emil to talk about some of our upcoming initiatives.
Thanks, Tara. As you've just heard, the city and our partners have made significant progress on the 2017 to 2027 strategy, as initiatives such as East Main have been put in place and the MFDE program and other code refinements are being used. Now is a good time to think about the upcoming work program and what additional actions the city may want to pursue. Next slide, please, Tara. Overall needs for affordable housing and affordable housing options in Bellevue and the region are significant. As we know, the city will be updating its housing needs assessment that looks at the full range of incomes in the city, as well as the associated housing need. So not only the 0 to 80% AMI, but AMI levels above 80% as well. This work on the 0 to 80% AMI was last updated in 2016, so there's a real need to update our needs assessment. There will be a regional and east side discussion in the coming months, and this is going to be informed by technical work at the state level to start, and then it will filter down to the county and then to the east side in Bellevue. And finally, as Tara mentioned, the periodic update of the city's comprehensive plan that council launched 6 weeks ago has a major focus on housing supply, affordable housing, and analyzing different housing typologies in the city. Next slide, please, Tara. Based on our progress on the 2017 affordable housing strategy and that we're on track to exceed that 2027 target of unit production, tonight we wanted to lay out the foundation for the process that we're going to use to identify what's called the next right work. So this effort is going to identify the next actions that are going to inform the 2022 to 2023 work program of primarily community development and development services staff who are focused on housing. And this is going to cover both housing supply and affordability, as they are very linked topics. The process is going to include a stakeholder engagement phase with a report back to council following that stakeholder engagement. We wanted to give council a brief overview of some of the initial considerations that we're going to use to help frame our engagement with the stakeholders, and I'll briefly go through these for council. The first one about geographic distribution and expanding typologies is about where new housing and affordable housing opportunities should occur in the city. So the geographic distribution across the city, as well as what type of typologies or housing types may be appropriate in different areas of Bellevue. The second consideration is the expected housing unit production tied to a specific action. Some might be higher producers and others might be anticipated to produce at a lower level. Third, the affordability level of the units to be produced based on the area median income we'll be tracking. So you'll be able to clearly see if something's focused on 0 to 50 AMI, for example, or more focused on 80 to 120% AMI as another example. Fourth, the time needed for entitlement and construction. So essentially the speed of delivery of different actions is a key consideration. Fifth is the ability to attract capital dollars and scale up a particular action. So this may be a new idea, for example, that could take hold in Bellevue and really build momentum. So we'll be assessing that as well. Number 6 is relating to equity outcomes. So how can we look at access to housing as far as addressing past inequities, allowing greater access to opportunity in Bellevue, and also improving some of the socioeconomic mobility of people living in the city. Number 7 is about involving the anticipated amount of partnerships. So really looking for actions that might have a lot of partners out there to help us do them. And lastly, the amount and complexity of needed policy or code work to actually go implement in action as a key consideration. We could go to the next slide, please, Tara. There's a number of ideas that we're going to be discussing with the stakeholders. The list of ideas is populated from past council discussions, the previous Affordable Housing Technical Advisory Group, and a lot of the ongoing dialogue with the community. So the groupings for the next strike work ideas are shown on this slide. You'll see a mix of housing supply and affordability topics. You'll see opportunities for ownership models and new housing types such as DADUs, as well as additional incentives for housing. There's been interest in how to streamline the process to use rezones for housing sites as opposed to the longer process for a comp plan amendment and then a rezone. Land is expensive in Bellevue, as council knows, and continues to increase at a higher rate. So we'll be looking at a potential formal land acquisition strategy that might help mitigate these land increases. There'll be discussion of how we can assure that housing is keeping up with job growth, because this can be done through actions such as housing minimums or increased incentives for housing production. The idea of potential mandatory affordable housing is on the list as well. And finally, the topic of potential new revenue sources, such as a housing levy as an example, or a fee for commercial development that goes to housing is also on the list. So as Deputy City Manager Brennan described, this would be a starter list, and clearly if stakeholders had other ideas or refinements, we'd want to hear those from our stakeholder groups. Next slide, please. City staff will be working with the stakeholders we have in the community to help prioritize the potential next actions. We're using a consultant to help assist with our work, both to facilitate it and accelerate this effort. Following engagement with a broad array of stakeholders in late April and May, we're going to go ahead and distill the input on prioritization and then report back to council. We'd estimate this happening in roughly a June time period of this year. And this is going to be a great opportunity to hear from nonprofits, community leaders from across the city, housing developers, business community, Eastside Housing Roundtable, affordable housing tenants with lived experience, and the ARCH organization. Next slide, please, Tara. So as we draw to a conclusion of tonight's presentation, here's a summary of the next right work process. There is a strong need to identify these next actions for the city, and we are now going full force ahead to work on this stakeholder engagement process and then report back to the council. So let's move on to the concluding slide, and happy to go back to slides if needed. So again, this is information only tonight, no action required, but happy to go back and fill in any blanks on any of the slides or answer any questions. So I can hand it back over to you now, Mayor.
Thank you. Let me change my screen here. So, it looks like we're meeting our original goals, 10-year goals, which is great. So I think, what staff wants to find out is how you feel about the considerations and the next steps that have been outlined. I know that Councilmember Stokes was key in helping us create our affordable housing strategy. So I will start with him. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I have to say, this was really, I was really looking forward to the presentation and everything. And I was very, very pleased and struck with the complexity and the depth that you've gone on this. I really like this. I said before, we're not in 2017 anymore. And frankly, 2017 is another planet in a sense, with all this happened between now and then. So you can always ask questions about things, but I think that'd be at this point, just kind of back and forth just to hear herself talk on things. And I really like this. I was really looking forward to seeing it. What my concerns are, and again, we don't need to ask questions and get some answers to it, but what my concerns are is that we're still basing this on what we came up with in 2017, and yes, we have achieved those. I think what we looked at then was different considerably from what we're looking at now. And I think, to your credit, you're addressing that. And that's what's important. One of the questions I guess would be is, I don't think you have answers because we're still working on it. It's part of your plan. But how many new affordable housing units do we actually need based on the number of people who are here, how things are changing, about the economy and everything else? Because we kind of still get in this, well, we said 2,500 and we got it, and we count it with a lot of different things that really, when you look at the numbers of new units, it's been very, very good, but it's not anywhere near what it takes to actually address the need. I think we have the capacity to do that. I think we have plans going forward on this, and and there are things like, well, the Mary's Place is interesting because Mary's Place, yes, added some 90 rooms, but Mary's Place is temporary. So, these things are changing all the time. And I am concerned about the changes in the community. And we hear a lot about the changes in the housing, what's new housing being put up. A lot of housing that's affordable is not there anymore. There are houses that in places where people have been in for a long time, and what happens? How do we deal with another Highland Village? All these other things. So it's complex. And again, to your credit on this, and I'm very pleased to see this. This is a very comprehensive and very bold plan to move forward on this. It's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take a lot of money, and the council, really needs to get behind this. And we have to have some conversations between now and when you come back with this on some of the tougher issues about what do we put in place, and what how can we and really make a very up-to-date, thorough, accurate count of what do we really need and what do we really have now. Because there are a lot of ways you can count things and make it look good. I think we've done a great job, but I think we have just a tremendous job ahead of us, and I think we're able to take it on. And I'm personally very heartened by the work you've done here and the way you set this out. So I'm ready to start to work on this, and look forward to your coming back with and having these discussions with us on and with the stakeholders. And we're getting more and more people as stakeholders. I think we've made changes and a lot of attitudes in the community that are positive on this. And we had these conversations with the legislators today. I think there are things we need to keep pushing from that level. I'm just very excited about it and looking forward to moving this forward. You know, as I said, the 2017 10-year program, that was then. This is now. And I'm looking forward to your work and coming back and having these discussions, and sometimes having it set up so we can have some really some good briefings and also some really hearty discussions at council with enough time to actually get into some details of everything back and forth. So I don't have any questions. My only question is you know, help us realize or know what we need to do to make this move. We can give you our ideas, we can community give your ideas, but you, the staff, knows how to get this stuff done and what needs to be done. So let's continue to have a really good conversation and work together on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm going to speak and then I'll go to Councilmember Barksdale. First of all, I'm really excited to be attacking this again. And I have mixed emotions. I'm kind of conflicted. On the one hand, you know, I look at some of the things that have worked and I'm so excited, like the MFTE. We have funding through various sources. And yet when you count the number of units that are actually being created, it's just woefully small. And yes, we're making our 10-year goal, but that was a very, very low goal. And so, you know, I'm anxious to re-up our commitment and renew our goal. And to Councilmember Stokes' point, you know, HDC, Housing Development Consortium, gave us a goal of 1,000 units a year. And I'd love to see what staff thinks is a reasonable goal. If that is a reasonable goal, 1,000 new affordable units a year on a variety of affordabilities. But I'd also like to look at partnering with our other cities, and we do that through ARCH. And I would love to look at increasing our funding to ARCH so that we can take the funding that we have through the 1590 and other sources if possible, and be good partners to the region and see if we can create, you know, the amount of affordable housing in the region that we need to have. It's not just Bellevue that needs to do this, it's the whole region. And we're lucky to have the staff support that we have and a plan that we have and the council support. And I'd like to, you know, be successful as a city, but also in the region. So on slide 16, and you don't necessarily have to bring it back up, but it talks about key considerations, and I would love sustainable to be part of that. I know that actually that is mentioned in our original affordable housing plan strategies, understanding that sustainable development lowers the cost of living there. So I'd like to be one of the key considerations. And I do have to say, you know, in the numbers that you're reporting here, you're counting how many units since 2017. But remember, we started with about 1,300 affordable housing units, which is not that much, but at least it's more. The total affordable housing units in the city is a lot bigger than what we've created since 2017, but it's not enough. I very much understand that. So let's see, make sure I think that's it. I think I'm mostly curious about how we can reset the goal for how many units we create, whether it's in the next 10 years or whether it's how many we create every year from here on out. So I don't know if you can answer that tonight or if you want to tackle that later, Emil, but.
Yeah, we'll have a process underway shortly on the city's standpoint, as well as working with the ARCH consortium on both affordable housing need and then looking at the different cities and what they're actually renewing as their updated targets. So it's a number of months of work still, but that is we're we're just excited about the council and updating that needs and target number so we can get to work on things. And I will make that change on the considerations as well, Mayor.
Oh, thank you for that. Okay. Councilmember Barksdale, followed by Councilmember Zahn.
All right, thank you. Thanks, Mike, Emil, and Tara for the presentation. Really appreciate it. And I like the direction that it's headed in and all the work that you've already done to date. I do have a few maybe additional considerations for consideration. I would love your feedback on this too. So one is difficulty to redo or opportunity costs. So if we are 10 years down the road and it's something that makes more sense to do now as we're growing, as opposed to trying to go back and redo or implement policy based on like after we've already grown. I think that would be one. Span of use cases. I think it's related to AMI level in some sense, but it's still different. It's if it addresses more people or across people across more life stages, things like that, I think that's a really good consideration. And then the third one is which projects are more government inherent, meaning are they less which ones are less likely to happen if we don't do them, if that makes sense. And I imagine it's usually going to be the ones that are at the lower AMI levels because it just doesn't pencil for market rate developers and such. The last two things, one, I think the implication from the chart, it doesn't tell what the AMI is for Bellevue. It's for CTAC Bellevue, which has a pretty broad range. But when I look up the AMI in the chart, it implies sort of 80,000, I guess, or so, 80 to 90,000 AMI for CTAC Bellevue. But when I look up the AMI for Bellevue, it's 129,000 in 2020 dollars when I look on the census site. So if we could make that explicit, and if I would imagine we're skewing on the higher end in terms of area median income. So I'd be interested in how we're reconciling the difference between the average for CTAC Bellevue and Bellevue. And I think that influences, the reason I'm raising this because I think it influences what we consider in terms of AMI actions and affordability. Last thing, in terms of housing need, like the mayor mentioned, I'm really looking forward to that result because as I understand it, and I totally understand why it was the way it was in 2017, it was the strategy was based on tools available instead of the need. So I'm really looking forward to the need. Just three really quick questions. Is that going to be broken out by AMI, the need broken out by AMI level? What's a pathway to lower, I don't expect you to have to answer this one tonight. What's the pathway to lower AMI housing? Just given one of the trends that was in the chart was that we're seeing more lower AMI renters renting in higher AMI units. So I'd be interested in what that pathway is to getting more of that lower income, lower AMI housing, I mean. And then how are we future-proofing our strategy, the update? So is it going to be based on a future growth trend in King County? And I guess I'm trying to mitigate, we're in 2022, the last one was done in 2027 and 10 years out. And we're sort of like, growth has sort of, I know some of that growth was unanticipated, but some of it was known. And I feel like, I guess I'm curious how we're future-proofing or planning to future-proof the upcoming next right work, if that makes sense. How we're determining that.
Okay, so I'll go ahead and hit some of these questions that you had, Councilmember Barksdale. On the three ideas for kind of modified or potential new considerations, I think the staff and our consultant, we can take that into account as we kind of refine these. I think a couple of them might nest under things like either opportunities for partnerships, and clearly the AMI level one, we can break down a bit of the span of use cases as you mentioned. And then the difficult to redo or opportunity cost, that isn't a good one to put in there. We often need to define opportunity cost for the lay person involved with the in the stakeholder engagement, but that's a good one to add as well. You're correct in noting that the county area median income is different than the Bellevue area median income. So I think when we come back to council to report back on this work, we can kind of dig a bit deeper on those differences between AMI levels and some of the pros and cons of using different AMI levels for different cities. So that is a good point that you've made about the county versus the Bellevue AMI level. Let's see, as far as the needs assessment, it will be broken down by AMI level. That is the way to do it, as well as housing typology. So those are two facets to be thinking about for the needs assessment. And then the final one about kind of future proofing and setting up that feedback loop and getting better information. The county planning policies have actually called for what I'm going to call a more robust reporting structure for cities with the assistance of Arch and the county. So I think I see a benefit of a more rigorous way that Bellevue and others are actually going to collect information over time and be a bit more accountable on the targets that are set for individual cities and the county. So I think there's some positive steps in that direction, Councilmember Barksdale.
That's great to hear. Thank you.
Great. Councilmember Zahn.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mike and Emil and Thera. This is, I'm really glad that we're working on this right now. I think we need to move with even more urgency and to scale up. I agree with the mayor to include sustainability in here. Every one of these units are going to last well beyond the 2050, where we're supposed to be, carbon neutral. So taking care of that will be important. I would like to comment on the shelter preservation and new units, and I would like to see those reported separately, because shelter is not permanent housing and preservation is not adding more units. So while we want to count those other two categories, I do want to make sure we're not lumping them all in as part of adding more supply. So that's one of the things that I was thinking about. The other one is whether we're thinking about both rentals and home ownership. So as we look at the different, maybe that's part of the expanded typologies, but I do want to make sure that when we're talking about housing, we're talking about both rentals as well as home ownership as options. How we might be able to move faster on, I noticed micro units. We haven't actually created any or incentivized any production of that. So whether we could look at some strategies to help with that piece as well. On the stakeholder outreach, whether we can, there's ways to meet people where they are, because I know sometimes it can be challenging to reach the very community that we're trying to reach. So that piece, I agree with Councilmember Barksdale about if we can separate out into the 30, 60, 80, the AMI levels to better understand, what the needs are compared to the supply. And I just want to confirm that when we talk about housing demand, that are we using our Vision 2050 forecast as part of developing what our goals are going to be? So that was one piece I wasn't completely clear on. And then in the table that we have in our packet, I think there was one that shows the different strategies that we had back in the 2017 plan. And it shows B2 and E2 as with a check mark as though it's done. But I don't believe we're done, because B2 is related to ADUs. And so while we've done one component of that, I believe maybe that should be, instead of a check mark, maybe ongoing, where we've got some things done. And then on E2, where that's the piece around the 10.2 million of funds available, I'm not sure that we should be checking the box there either, because we may find, as your presentation shows, that to build to the scale and number of units that we are trying to, that may still be insufficient to build to the scale even with partners. And then lastly, I'm excited about having the community engagement guide for the permanent supportive housing, because I do believe that as we move forward, having that guide available for developers will be even more important to help our community understand, as well as our developers, about what the needs are around permanent supportive housing. So anyway, all in all, I'm super excited about us moving forward with this work and leveraging and working with our partners, how to best leverage the 1590 money, potentially bonding against future revenues. And really, it's going to take everyone, all hands on deck, to move to the scale that we need to for housing and affordable housing in our city. So I did have some questions embedded in there. Thank you.
Okay, I'll go ahead and answer a few of those questions if it's okay, Mayor.
Yes.
Let's see, as far as the reporting, we will kind of clean up the way that we're reporting just to not have any confusion with the shelter units and the preservation units. So they will be shown probably on the same page, but we'll clearly define which ones are new units, since that's a key issue. We will be dealing with rental and ownership in the next ideas work, the next right work. So those are both included in there. Micro units, you're correct that we haven't done the code work to actually kind of enable any micro unit developments. It's really, if you read the affordable housing strategy, it's about parking. So it's potentially removing parking if it's micro units, and then analyzing, what would be any potential negative impacts or with spillover parking if there were cars associated. So that would be part of the next right work discussion, to talk about micro unit opportunities. We'll go in and look at the table in the packet and kind of how we're reporting on the E2 and B2. I would agree with you that it's either an ongoing or a half check mark on the accessory dwelling unit discussion, because that's not fully complete. But it is, partial work done on that as far as ADUs, but not on the DADUs at this point. Let's see, we're really excited about getting the engagement guide kind of polished up and ready for use. So there's ongoing work on that one. And we are working with our outreach staff on trying to meet people where they are as far as the stakeholder engagement. And that's for all the groups on the list. There definitely are some preferences for how we can engage people the best moving forward. So I think I have most of those council members on.
The only other one I had was the Vision Zero forecast. Is that the measure of how many more units that we'll be using to compare against as the need?
Yeah, apologize for that one. So we look at it two ways. We look at existing deficiency of units. So that one's relatively straightforward, where you're looking at AMI levels and actual units in the city affordable at that level. And then a bit more complicated one is looking at our Vision 2050 and our King County target for the 35,000 housing units, and then looking at what percentiles those new units should be from an AMI level. So we do both look at it current and into the future as well.
Great, thank you so much.
Councilmember Lee, would you allow me to comment on one thing? I'm on the county's Affordable Housing Committee, council members on, and we've had long discussions about whether to count preserved housing as new affordable housing units or not. And one thing to consider, and nobody knows the answer to this, but one thing to think about is that we have a lot of older apartments that are naturally affordable that we don't count into our affordable housing stock. And any affordable housing that is preserved is a unit that has gone on the market, that is about to be purchased by a developer for high-end housing. So when it gets purchased by an agency that then preserves it as permanent affordable housing, in my opinion, we should count that, because that is permanent, that's now protected from development, and that's a permanent affordable housing, more so even than MFTE units. So that's just kind of my opinion and what I represent when we talk about it at the county level. But that's a conversation I'd like to hear from staff at some point. Don't have to.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I do think it should be counted. I guess what I'm thinking is that it should be counted as part of the preservation of stock, which I think you're talking about, so that we're not actually taking a subtraction of affordable housing units. But I think it's a both and.
Okay. Councilmember Lee, followed by Councilmember Stokes.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. As you know, as we will know, this is a very important, high priority for the city. But we know housing, is a big, big challenge. And but I'm very glad to see that the progress that the staff and we are making. It's impressive. We started with practically nothing, but now we are meeting our initial goal. And obviously it's far short, it's not close to what we need to, to make. But the point is that it's a work in progress. And I'm glad that we have made the staff have the progress we have, and that allows you to learn from what we have done, what we may not have done. And now you're able to look at other things that we could do, other programs, other opportunities, other ways to increase the housing supply. And there are more, obviously there are different kinds. And I think, there are a lot of suggestions we have made, or the council made, like sustainability and this and rental and ownership and so on, so on. But I think these are all, and other things we haven't even talked about and considered. But again, this is a work in progress. And I'm glad that we made the progress to the point that you are able to, the staff and the community, look at what other things can we do to keep on increasing the housing supply, trying to meet the needs that we have. And I think that's good. And I'm sure by listening to you, you're already presenting the program. You're talking about the various ways of doing it. You're talking about different considerations. And so, keep on doing what you're doing. And the council will give you suggestions. And other people, other partners, they will be coming on the scene. And so the only thing I would say is, we will continue to give you suggestions and ideas, and the staff, you would continue to move forward and, see what we can do. And so thank you for doing what you've done. And thanks to all the people that are making all the suggestions and recommendations and working toward the goal that we're trying to achieve. And more, of course. We don't know. The goal is always moving, right? It's always moving forward. It's always increasing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Lee. Councilmember Stokes.
Yeah, just a couple of things, Mayor. I really appreciate and wanted to, mention the regional cooperation and all that. That is very important. I mean, these, this problem is not just in Bellevue, and the problem is just not in Kirkland or anyplace else. And we are working together. And I think one of the things we've done is actually move Arch, its abilities and scope and everything higher, and there are other organizations working with. So I just wanted to compliment you for bringing that forward and believing in that, because I think that's a key to this as well. The other factor is, and I appreciate the conversation we had on the preserved housing, and it's a complex piece. I mean, obviously, if we have 2,000 people in preserved housing now, and we have 5,000 people who need housing, counting the 2,000 doesn't house the 5,000, but people in the 2,000 are going to not be there, or the housing, as you said, another housing village thing comes up. So it's a complex, and we have to look at it that way. And I think that's where you're approaching it too. And it's important to be aware of those, how it's all connected. But the overall, the thing we really are trying to tackle that we haven't done well on is, as much as we can, is the people who are unhoused now, and they're not in a preserved house or they're not in another house. And how do we deal with that? So it's complex, but I think by peeling it out like this and talking about it, I think we can approach it and come up to solutions that put it all together. I think we're doing some really great conversation and thinking about this, and certainly staff has. So very good. This is a just amazing plan going forward. I'm very proud of it.
Great, thank you. Deputy Mayor, I'm sorry, I skipped over you, and I'm so eager to listen to Councilmember Stokes again. So would you like to weigh in?
Thanks, Mayor. No worries. No, I mean, excellent conversation this evening on this topic. A lot of good questions. Some of my colleagues beat me to the punch with some of those questions, but questions that need to be asked. I appreciate it. And Thara and Emil, really appreciate you highlighting a lot of the great work the city has done. I mean, I'm not sure if everyone saw, but the fact that there are no examples of the new MFTE not being used is extraordinary. And I think that will only increase in terms of number of units going forward being created. As well as the 5090 money, where that's going to Mary's Place, the project partnerships that we're seeing with Amazon and Sound Transit and Dash and SRM and Microsoft. So while the numbers are currently, I don't think anyone is satisfied with, and clearly we need to reset that goal. But I just also feel like momentum is really starting to also move on this as well. And I think the number of units being created is only going to increase dramatically, especially as we look forward on further developing this plan, resetting our goals, et cetera. But really like the plan, really like the way this is laid out, really like the considerations as well as we look to move forward. I don't think it was mentioned, but Emil, I would love to also see, as part of those considerations, an analysis of what other municipalities have done, what has worked, what hasn't worked, just in case we're missing something. I think you know in those considerations have all the big buckets there, but we'd just love to see if there's anything else that we can learn from what other municipalities have done in terms of similar sized cities that are experiencing tremendous growth. I think that would be so worth our time to do that. But great presentation, and yeah, ready to really dive into this and start moving this forward. Thank you.
Terrific, thank you. Councilmember Stokes, did you have your hand up one more time, or is that just left over? Okay, great. Well, this has been a great discussion. Staff, do you feel like you've received the feedback that you were looking for?
Yes, we did, Mayor.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much. That brings us to the end of our meeting. We are adjourned, and we will see you next week in person. Oh my goodness, that will be exciting. All right. Good night, everybody.
Good night.